Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. MJ, how are we doing? Do we have more people joining the room?
Yep, we have a couple more still joining in.
Okay, we're gonna wait about probably 2 minutes to get started to allow everyone to join. Is MJ, is Senator Wynn?
Yes,
In-
he is.
Okay, great. All right, so we're gonna wait 2 minutes to get started. Okay. All right, MJ, is everyone, or it's at least slow
Yes.
down the number of people
Yes.
entering the room?
Slow down in the waiting room for sure.
Okay, great. All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to call this meeting the October 25th meeting of the Connecticut AI Task Force to order. We're going to start and see if my co-chair, Nick D'Onofrio, has anything to say.
Well, Senator, all I have to report is everything is quiet here on the western front of Connecticut. All good, great, beautiful, sunny, crisp day. Looking forward to the discussion here and helping us all figure out how to map forward the state of Connecticut and this wonderful gift of technology. So pleasure to be with you, Senator. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick, and thank you for everything you do to keep us safe on the western front of Connecticut. So. It's good knowing we have you there on, on those front lines. So with that, today's meeting, we're focusing on state use of AI and regulating state use of AI, and is also potential use cases of AI in government. So we have a number of great speakers. We're going to go through. This meeting will probably be a little longer. We'll try to wrap it up by 2. We have five speakers today, figuring about 30 minutes for each. And then at the end of the meeting, we do want to go over Case is going to speak because we've requested that they run a report for us that we think would be valuable in finishing our work. So with that, our first speaker today is Senator Joe Wynn from Washington State. He represents the 34th District in Washington, I believe. From his biography, he resides in West Seattle with his family. He's the chair of the Energy and Technology Committee there, and that's why his work, he was recommended to me as someone to speak to us. And then looking through his bio and some of the legislation he's co-sponsored, we do definitely have some of the same issues that crop up across states. One of the things that stood out was co-sponsoring a bill on solid waste, which is something that our energy chair is very involved in, Senator Norm Needleman. But with that, Senator Wynn, we've asked him to come speak on Washington State has put forward some policies and procedures regarding the use of generative AI. We do have Katie Ruckel, the Chief Privacy Officer of Washington State, presenting later on. So, but we've also asked Senator Wynn to come speak to us about some of their state's work in developing policies and procedures regarding the use of artificial intelligence. So with that, Senator Wynn.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it as well. I'm also in Seattle, so it is a cool, crisp day. Sounds like it's similar to what you're all experiencing as well. And it is also very quiet here, but it is 8 o'clock in the morning, so that's probably why it is quiet. So I'm Senator Joe Wilson in the 34th district, which is basically Seattle. And you know, in addition to being the chair of the Energy, Environment, and Technology Committee, I'm also the vice chair of Ways and Means, but probably more relevant for this conversation, my background is largely in tech. So I worked at Microsoft for about 10 years. And before that, I was in startups, largely in technical roles. And previously I had worked on engineering teams developing applications kind of in this space around big data before big data was really a thing. So it's been very interesting being a millennial in the legislature, where in the past 2 years, I've had to help my members use their computers, show them how to use Zoom, show them how to use Teams. And then now seeing those same members are all of a sudden experts on AI and want to regulate it in a number of different ways. So that's been a very interesting switch, going from this is how you turn on Zoom to, oh, you want to regulate AI? Like, let me help you with what that might look like. So I think the reason why I bring that up is oftentimes in the legislature, it isn't as if folks come in saying, I'm going to campaign on regulating AI, but obviously you get the same amount of votes as anybody else. So we spent a number of time, a lot of time this past year, just helping folks understand what it is. And candidly, I'm just going to put this out there because of this group. Oftentimes, what I've seen in the past 5 years of being in office, if there is a new technology or something that somebody is scared about, there's two things that happen. One is nothing, and then two is a ban. And I don't think that that's necessarily the right path for what AI potentially could be, given the value that it could potentially have, but also the tremendous power and also the influence that might happen as well. But because you want to make sure that as we're engaging thoughtfully, we want to be able to have policies in place that actually help, not necessarily harm as well. When I first came to office, I think one of the best pieces of advice that I received was the fact that the legislature, or at least our legislature, and I assume others as well, is fundamentally set up to solve yesterday's problems tomorrow, right? Fundamentally, it is a slow process. Our democracy is slow on purpose. So when you look at things like technology, it's hard to regulate the actual technology itself because it is moving so fast. So oftentimes what we've seen be successful is you have a framework, you set up guardrails. So I'm going to start with that context in terms of some of the policies we've done that's tangentially related to AI. I know that Katie is also on to talk about the kind of guardrails and the guidelines that we have for generative AI within the state, but I'll focus on the policies as well. And then, Senator, if you want, I'm happy to answer questions. I don't think I'll take the full 30 minutes. So if folks have questions, feel free to let me know and I'll try to answer them as well. But there's been some key legislation that we've passed in recent years that are related to automated decisions. One is biometrics. The one that's probably more pertinent in this case is actually facial recognition. So even though the technologies are different, the framework that we use to help guide the conversations on this, I think, are largely going to be the same. So when it comes to AI, it isn't so much that it's good or bad, it's how it's used, right? So things like accountability reports, disclosures around potential bias, defining what is or what is not high risk, right? So when you look at AI, when you go on Netflix and it suggests to you what you might like based off of your previous viewing patterns, that's AI. When you go on your phone and it says, hey, these are all pictures of dogs, is this your dog? That is also AI. I don't think the state necessarily, or at least Washington State doesn't necessarily need to regulate if a dog is, your dog on your phone, but if it's used for sentencing, if it's used for, housing considerations, if it's used for interviews or job applications, it's important for us to recognize when that's the case as well. And probably the most important part when it comes to AI is the data, right? AI in itself is not as complex as you think it is. The reason why AI is coming to the state that it's in now is because of our compute power. It takes a lot of intensity for us to parse through large scale data in these language learning models for us to then predict what's going to happen next. So the reason why AI is all of a sudden this big deal is because the compute power that we have with cloud computing is getting to the point where you can unlock a lot of things that were not necessarily possible before. But AI itself has been around for decades. If you played SimCity as a kid, your gaming experience was different depending on how you interacted with the game. That's actually AI. When you go on Amazon and it tells you, hey, you've been buying these things, you might like this thing, that's also AI. So I think one of the things that I want to impress on the folks that are on the call right now is the fact that it is pervasive in our communities. It is being used in ways that I think are very important and also benign, relatively speaking, as well. But there are potential applications that can be compromised and be a harm to our residents. So if you look at California, they've actually been starting on a bill, AB 331, by Assembly Member Bauer Khan, where they're not necessarily trying to regulate the technology itself. They're trying to define what is or what is not high risk. And they're also trying to define who is responsible, right? In the context of Section 230 at the federal level, is it the developer who creates technology? Is that the person that's in charge? Or is it the deployer, the person who's using the tool that is in charge? I think those are the types of questions that we have to grapple with from a legislative perspective in order for us to best understand how this can be thoughtfully implemented. Obviously, there's going to be ramifications as it relates to AI in terms of jobs, in terms of copyrights. Those are all very important conversations as well. So you almost have to silo the types of conversations that you have related to AI. And that's kind of what we're doing right now, where from a technology perspective, we have a couple of, small local businesses here. You may have heard of them, Microsoft, Amazon, that exists in my backyard. One, obviously, that I work for, where when you have those types of resources and the type of talent that you have there, there's a tremendous opportunity. We're talking billions of dollars of investments. We're talking high-paying jobs. But you're also talking about transforming an economy with a tool that is available to us right now. So what I would say is, as you're thinking through policy, the inclination that I've seen from a lot of folks is straight up to ban, which I don't know if that would be my perspective, or that's definitely not my perspective. But there are already examples out there of guardrails put into place on technology that I think would be a good balance of protecting your residents, but also not necessarily stifling innovation. Part of it is because, even if your particular state chose to go a certain route, doesn't mean anybody else would. So from my perspective, when I work on technology policy, knowing that Washington State is kind of uniquely positioned in some of these spaces, I actually worked on a data privacy bill that would probably have covered some of these things. It didn't pass in Washington State for political reasons, but it's passed, I think, in 13 other states. So it's funny to see a bill that I wrote not pass here, but then pass everywhere else. So I think part of it is, as you work on these things too, knowing that because this is such a new dynamic, it may have ramifications beyond what you would normally consider. So that's kind of the high level. I'd be happy to kind of answer any questions or talk through with folks around specific focuses they want, Senator Moroni, or I can go on further. I am a politician, so I can keep talking as well.
No, I know, right? You never give the microphone to a Rotary president or a politician. So I think we'll open it up to questions. I do have a few. I'll get started. One, you mentioned the facial recognition bill. I was actually someone did point to that to me to look at as a good model. And again, completely agreed. We don't want to stifle innovation. We're looking to do the broad guardrails here. And we are one of the states that did, I say copying is the sincerest form of flattery. We did flatter Washington State, even though you didn't pass it. We did pass comprehensive data privacy that was based on the Carlisle, Washington, your model.
Yep. Yeah.
So, but one of the things I want to look at is ongoing assessment and adversarial testing, red teaming. How do we do that? Is it within, and we've seen some frameworks BSA spoke with us about their framework, and it's, so that could potentially be within requiring companies to have a risk management framework, that they would have to do that testing. But also, I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts in looking from the bill, your facial recognition bill, on how to incentivize, encourage companies to do that ongoing assessment again, because we know the model drift, we know that the things change, as well as the red teaming or adversarial testing.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? So when you look at AI specifically, the algorithm itself is almost agnostic. It is neither good nor bad. It's how you feed that data into the tool. So it's like a knife, where it's like fire. It could be good or bad. There's a couple of examples of organizations doing it well. So the Allen Institute for AI. So from the late Paul Allen, he put together an Institute for AI, I think 14 years ago, before this was really even a thing. And they're actually trying to unpack some of the responsibility that you're talking about right now. The reason why it's so difficult to review, and why a lot of companies don't necessarily open up their books when it comes to examining AI for, say, for instance, bias, is really expensive. That's also their secret sauce, right? Like that is the crux of how they train their models. There's also liability issues associated with it. So the Allen Institute, amongst other folks, are trying to build their own models to mimic what other organizations are doing. It's very expensive, so that's why not many people do it. So potentially partnering with somebody like that. Interestingly, there was a study around AI, kind of transparency around AI as well. And, for its faults and failings, Meta is actually doing a good job in terms of opening their books to help people review what's going on. So what I would probably suggest is look at some of those leaders doing exactly that, and then seeing if there's ways to implement and encourage some development around testing and review for bias. Certification is one topic that's come up around, like, if you do it, even if you don't necessarily publicly disclose the findings, there's certification efforts that can happen. At the state level, obviously that's tricky, but that can be something that can be discussed.
Yeah, thank you. And I see a few hands, and so the interest of liability is, I'm going to ask more questions at the end. I'll let everyone else. I just want to finish this thought now. The issue of liability is interesting, and so that's one thing. Like, how do we encourage user feedback, right? As we go through, do we allow a cure period if the problem is identified? I don't know what you can do there, if you have any thoughts around.
Yeah, you're like bringing up traumatic experiences and debates that I've had in the last.
I'm sorry to trigger your PTSD this early in the morning.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Right. So for those who don't know, what Senator Moroni is basically saying is that oftentimes technology is built and it's not necessarily perfect, so things can go awry. When you get an update on your phone that says, hey, update your iPhone or update this app, oftentimes you're fixing bugs. Well, those bugs can have legal ramifications, right? And in this place, the difference is, are they malicious? Did they do this on purpose to hurt people? Or was this just a bug that they should be able to fix or cure? The two major topics that we always grapple with in Washington State is whether it's the enforcement, right? Generally speaking, when you talk about curing or not curing, that isn't so much an issue so much as, should this be an attorney general enforcement? Should this be a private right of action enforcement? So the enforcement key is going to be the most important part of the bill, because that's when the lawyers get involved and that's when things get expensive. So the curing component, I think from a technologist standpoint, that's like a no-brainer, right? Like, when you build technology, there's kind of a motto in tech where it's like build things fast, break things, and go forward, right? Like, things will not be perfect because the perfect technology doesn't exist. So I think a curing period is important. A lot of consumer advocates would disagree with me. So just know that that's going to be contentious.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And you did, you alluded to Assemblymember Bauer Khan before, and she will be presenting to our group at our next meeting.
Oh, wonderful.
About maybe 331. So with that, I'll go in the order that people are listed on my screen with their hands raised. So I'm going to start with Nick.
So, Senator, I'm going to yield to Vaid because I think he had his hand up before I did. So why don't you go first, and then I'll follow you. And then I think David's after that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You are.
Thank you, Nick. You actually had your hand up before me, but just to save time, I'm going to go first. Senator Nguyen, thank you so much for this wonderful clarification over your thoughts on what the major problems are. You mentioned that AI is almost everywhere. And you mentioned that there are different types of AI. You compared the AI in SimCity with the AI that we're dealing with today. I'm curious in your thoughts and in your efforts, where do you draw the line between AI that needs to be regulated and AI that is already regulated? Is a decision tree that is predefined by an engineer the same or held the same way as, let's say, a large language model trained on a lot of data? Is learning the boundary, or is it somewhere else?
Yeah, great question. And the clarification I'm going to add there is there are a lot of different types of AI. And right now, oftentimes when the discourse happens, especially at this level with this much energy, nobody knows the difference. And the reason why I kind of give those examples is that you have to be very clear in terms of what it is that you're trying to regulate, right? Generative AI is different than large language model, which is different than other types of machine learning. A lot of folks confuse machine learning and AI. They're two separate things, right? So the point that I would make around AI specifically, especially since it's something so new, is the accountability piece. So part of it is having an accountability report around what is it you intend to use it for? And then the other component is going to be what is a high risk, right? So you're never going to be able to regulate every single scenario, and probably regulating it one by one is not going to work. So for us, what we did with facial recognition, it was largely on sentencing and it was largely on surveillance, right? We felt that those were the two most critical aspects that facial recognition could be used inappropriately. And because they could be used inappropriately, we felt that there was a need for meaningful human review, which by NIST standards made it so that way it was 99.9% accurate, or something that was, astronomical. So for me, in terms of what should or should not be regulated, it should be things that have a meaningful impact on somebody's life, whether that's financial, whether that's housing, whether that's jobs, whether that's sentencing or things like that. Those should have some level of rigor associated with them as well. And you can still use the AI model to speed up that process, but there should be some backstop. In our case, for facial recognition, it was a court order to ensure that there was a judicial system that was involved in it. I don't think that that's necessarily involved for AI, but there should be a backstop as well.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Nick D'Onofrio here. You answered a lot of the questions I had, so I had to pivot quickly using AI to another set of questions. I think that along the lines of your, where could you get into trouble? How do you think about the source of the app or the source of the data? And I happen to agree with you. It is the data that makes the problem. And we know there are ways to contaminate that data. And if you don't know where it's actually coming together, if you don't know where this pie is actually being baked as a legislator, you're running a risk to assume that it's all what they said, unless they validate, hey, that's the way it comes together. Part of this comes together outside the United States, part of it comes together inside the United States. Do you think that way in the state of Washington? Or are you looking for lack of a better word, a bill of materials that says, okay, if you want us to use this, you have to tell us every component, every piece, where it's done, and then we have to decide whether that's acceptable, because there is risk associated with that too. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I completely agree. The two part is I've seen a lot of work groups or task force put together in Washington State for topics that the members themselves don't necessarily know how to grok, right? So if I were to give my colleagues an API that said, this is all the data sources from this particular model, I don't think that they'll be able to actually parse that in a way that would be meaningful. So it's twofold: is how do you do this in a way that is actually implementable versus how do you do this in a way where it's just another checkbox on your terms of service as well. So I think the component that you're talking about is absolutely right. And I think right now that's kind of the black box. Literally, I think Meta is the only one that discloses even some of where they get their information from. And it's because it's Meta, so they get it from their users. But most other AI, they're largely scraping online everything. And there's liability associated with that. So the hard part is how do we get that information, because they're not going to want to give it up, which is why the Allen Institute kind of comes into play. And then also, what do we do with it? So I think the other question you'll have to ask is, how would we put this in a digestible way where it would be meaningful for legislators who may not have experience in AI, but also can we give this to our residents to ensure that there's confidence? Because at the end of the day, I don't think our residents care about the language learning model that's being used. They care if it's trusted and if it's accurate, right? I think that's the value. So whether that's a specialized group that we are comfortable overseeing this, or whether it's disclosure, what I found has been successful. There's a number of advocacy organizations that do this for a living and that they're very passionate about this. If you're able to provide a framework that allows them to do independent review, that oftentimes gets you to what you need.
So I would just add, Senator, not to draw this out, there are parts of the federal government that do understand this because that's what they do for a living too, right? The defense and intelligence community, is deep and steep in all of this stuff. I'm sure you understand that.
Yeah.
And maybe we need to find a way to get some pointers from them. You look for this, you look for that.
Yeah.
You watch for this and you watch for that. There's no naive people here. I mean, sometimes that's done here too. I mean, sometimes it's done inadvertently, sometimes it's done covertly. So I think we have to be very realistic about this technology, especially in the hands of the wrong people. And those are the consequences that may have the greatest impact in the end. Comments?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. One thing I will preface is that although I know that there's an amount of great staffers that work in the federal government, I don't necessarily trust them to lead on these issues just because it's lucky when the government is still open, right? So I'm not waiting for them to act, but there is the AI Bill of Rights that we've seen. They've seen other frameworks. NIST we rely on a bunch as well. So I think you're absolutely right. There are experts in that space. And this is just my personal experience. It's when you find these experts for random topics. I do a lot of energy stuff. A lot of them, because of the Hatch Act and others, they cannot ask legislators questions, but you can ask them questions. So it's a weird dynamic. So for members or for folks who work on policy, sometimes I treat federal staffers or agencies that are nonprofits like genies. Like they can't tell you your wish. You can tell them the wish and they can give you the answers. It's a weird dynamic, but just know that exists. Yeah, Nick,
Thank you very much. All right, Dave.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Nguyen, for your comments and your helpful information. I have a bunch of questions, but in the interest of time, I think I'll just ask one of them, and it's maybe something we haven't talked about yet. So you mentioned earlier that some of the inclinations for people when they experience AI is to just ban it. I'm wondering if you could give us some examples of that happening. Like, are there jurisdictions, states, or countries that have said, we're gonna ban this as an example of where it went wrong, so we can look to what not to do as we're trying to put this stuff together?
Yeah, that was a reference to other technologies like facial recognition. There was a concerted effort to ban it after Clearview AI came out and folks realized what was being used for it. There's, I think in Washington State, eight members who are working on bills. Moratorium comes up more than ban, so they'll say pause versus ban. And then if you look at other technologies, that's certainly a case as well. So far I haven't seen anybody outright say ban. It's largely been the Elon Musk and other folks that say slow it down because they're probably behind. But just know that dynamic exists and that you will see pressure from folks once it comes crunch time to say ban, because I've seen that for just about every single technology that has come out. Blockchain, you have a blockchain work group that was very big a couple of years ago, never even got started because people heard Bitcoin and they were like, what is this Bitcoin thing? Should we ban it? So instead we had a work group, which now it's not really a thing. So it's kind of gone dormant. So just be mindful of it. I haven't seen it yet though.
Great, thank you. Mark?
Thanks, Senator Mark Raymond, CIO for the state of Connecticut. As you think about your sort of regulatory framework around this, do you consider sort of both sides? Like what are the incentives to protect you from liability? Like if you certify ethical performance versus sort of where the liability line is drawn? We've had a recent bill that provides some protections from cyber fees and fines if people can demonstrate that they're compliant with a framework. Is that part of your thinking in Washington?
Yeah, I think for your case specifically is around data sharing agreements, right? I bet you Connecticut has probably hundreds, if not thousands, of data sharing agreements with partners that utilize public information for a variety of reasons. And some of them could put that into their own models. And there's liability associated with the data sharing agreement that you may have with other folks. So I think that's absolutely the case. There should be a bar, at least for each state around, if you are going to use this data for an algorithm that produces results, it has to abide by certain guide rails. I think that is very critical for what you're doing. The certification component that you mentioned, I'm not trying to be mean here, but I've coming from the tech sector, seeing a state agency effectively manage technology is doesn't happen as often as I would like. So seeing what a state framework could look like that would play well with the technology sector, but also has the expertise from folks in state government, I haven't quite seen what that can look like. I don't think that that's a bad idea. I think that's actually a good idea. I've just not kind of figured out in my head what that can be. So if you figured it out, Mark, I'd love to know.
All right. Thank you for your answer. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, George?
And then if you're speaking, you might be on. There you go. Perfect.
There we go. Thank you. I apologize. Senator Nguyen, can I ask, as with your better background with Microsoft, what would be the avenue of even regulating co-pilots when it's going to be on everybody's shoulder? And you being up in Copilot being from Microsoft, and lacking some kind of training that could have been or would have been done prior to it being adopted by millions and billions of people. That is a significant liability for the globe.
Yes and no, right? If you look down on your Zoom window right now, you'll see something that says AI Companion. So it's similar to Microsoft Copilot. So we're actually using it right now. I actually had to stop. My staff told me to stop because of public records implications, but I use Copilot or AI Companions or Read AI to take notes during meetings, and they're very good. Like, yes,
they are.
Better than I could do. But they made me stop because of public records implications and whatnot. The lawyers got to me. So I think the answer to you, George, is largely around, so Copilot, at least to me, is, hey, can we make this email better? You mentioned these things. These are some action items that you had associated with the work that you're doing. So we kind of go back to the high risk versus not high risk kind of user scenarios that we might have. So if the worst case scenario is they misinterpreted an action item that I had and it said one thing when it really was another, there probably was not much harm that was caused associated with it. If the Copilot was doing more, that might have implications to somebody's livelihood or somebody's financial outcomes, then that's different. So again, I think it has to be commiserate with the outcomes that is being done. So that's why an accountability report is good. That's why defining kind of the outcomes that you want is good for some of the things. Part of the certification conversations that I've had has been, if you're using this in the public, what is it that you're actually trying to do? Because oftentimes that's not clear. And candidly, that also builds a case too. If they say that they're going to use it for one thing, but they use it for another, you want to have that documented. So for Copilot or for AI Companion, which is on right now in this conversation, I'm not too worried about that. But I'm more worried is if they are not using it for the intended purpose and they're just masking that with something else.
So one of the worries that I had when in conversation with the Watvani folks at CSIS is that with the Copilot now, you can basically tell it to create an agent, and with that agent go and hack the state of Connecticut's website and just keep on repeating, bring down his DNS every 30 seconds on a continual basis. And all you got to do is tell it to do that. And so that is the kind of, so we are not worried about the good people, but we are worried about the bad actors, the malicious intent, because they all have access to the Copilot. And I'm recalling my old days when I was helping banks transition to internet banks. There was always a conversation of there's always somebody's going to hack a bank, whether you put it online or put it wherever. And that's the kind of a scenario that I am trying to figure out where we can protect our state as well.
Yeah, I think that's a data security, cybersecurity issue more than AI issue. But yeah, I think that's a valid point.
Great, thank you. And I see one other hand raised.
Yeah.
This is DB. I have a question with these kind of AI and Copilot. I have seen AI detector mostly for texts or a brief written, a legal brief written that claims to be able to detect AI content.
Yeah.
And I am thinking that, okay, if a developer use a Copilot during the development process, it's not a bad thing. It's helping the developer write better code, giving them flaws in the code or a better way to write the same thing, maybe some cleaner code. And I don't see that to be a problem, but there could be other ways of using Copilot to write malicious things that I'm not considering here. So when these AI detectors are there, how accurate they are, especially for security, if we allow Copilot and we want to check and scan the code for AI content, or should we worry about scanning for AI content or only focus on scanning for vulnerabilities in the code? That's one question. The other question is that if somebody, even a college student, submits an essay written by AI or not written by AI, and the professor uses a AI detector and says it's looks like it's created by AI, how accurate these AI detectors are today?
Yeah. Well, great question. I think that is largely unknown at this point. The efficacy of AI detectors, from what I gather, is not as strong as it could be. But also, is that really a bad thing? It depends on the context. I'll be perfectly honest. I used ChatGPT to help write the state budget last year. I'm one of 3 budget writers in the Senate, and it was a good budget. It was bipartisan. It was thoughtful. It was well researched. It was all backed by my staff as well. I did not just use ChatGPT by itself. So there are implications in terms of how we can use this in a positive way. And I think oftentimes what you're talking about, Nibi, is largely around copyrights, ownerships, things like that. Where if you're writing right now you're seeing it with SAG-AFTRA, if you're writing a script, if you're doing AI generative art and it's in the form of another person. So the idea of being able to automate some of these things isn't itself bad, but if you're stealing somebody's idea, if you're stealing somebody else's voice, that is the bad thing. So candidly, I think the way that this is going to work itself out is going to be in the copyright space, because it kind of mirrors the two. If folks are using it for malicious reasons, you're not going to really pass a law that says you can't use it for malicious reasons, right? Because they're going to do it anyway. So again, if you define high risk, if you define sensitive data, I think the ramifications of AI is that now you're going to have states or local governments or federal governments really double down on their cybersecurity, because what you really don't want is for sensitive data to be stolen and then fed into a large language model that's used for AI that can do the things that you're talking about, right? So it's really the source that is going to be the concern, not necessarily the tool itself.
Great. Thank you very much. And what I would just ask, if maybe if you're willing to share contact information, if people have follow-up questions, we could send that out to the members afterwards. I did have a few other questions, but I will reach out to you in regards to them afterwards. Just in transparency, I'll say what they were, and then you and I can discuss them later on. Just interested in the ADPPA section 207 looked at algorithms and impact assessments, and it's risk-based, but it flipped it and it exempted low risk instead of defining what high risk was. Again, my concern with defining high risk is we both know how slow the legislative process is, and if you put it in law, there's the unknown unknowns, what's going to come along. So I'm considering going that opposite way that they have done, and that you exempt out the low risk versus naming what are high risk. And then the other, I did see on your Senate page, one of your priorities is in supporting marginalized communities. And so what we're going to look at doing in the final bill is, looking now. I don't know if you were at NCSL this year when Nancy Giordano spoke, and she's a tech futurist and saying we're 1% of the way into this new technological revolution. So how do we rebuild an economy that's fairer and works for everyone? So as we're looking at workforce and skills building, I'd love to collaborate with you on that.
Definitely. Basic income is how you do it, but neither here nor there. That's for another conversation. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I got to hop on my next one, but I sent my email in the chat group. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions or if you want to gut check anything. Not that I'm the expert. I just happen to be thinking about this as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay. Next, we have Heather Morton from NCSL, and she's going to go through and talk about state legislation regarding state regulation of AI. Heather?
Thank you, Senator. Let me just share my screen if I can really fast.
MJ, can you make sure she can share her screen?
Looks like, can you?
We can see that.
Yep.
Okay. Let me put it into, see if I can put it into, there we go. How's that? Okay. Thank you for your patience for that. Happy Wednesday, and thank you to the chairs and members of the task force for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Heather Morton, and I track privacy and technology issues for the National Conference of State Legislatures, and I'm pleased to provide you with an overview of the recent state legislative activities regarding the government use of artificial intelligence, or AI. Let's see, there we go. Before I dive into the heart of my presentation today, I wanted to take just a minute to give you an agenda of where I'm going to cover, what I'm going to cover on the government use of AI. First, I'm going to give you a really quick NCSL introduction. Then I'll summarize the state legislation enactments that regarding the government use of AI, focusing on government use inventories, criminal justice, and facial recognition. And then finally, I'll share some quick examples of state and local government AI use organized by type. And now that I've given you an idea of where I'm going, let me turn to the NCSL introduction. For those of you who are not familiar with NCSL, we are the country's most trusted bipartisan organization serving legislators and staff for more than 40 years. We're actually coming up on our 50th anniversary. We promote policy innovation, create opportunities for lawmakers to share knowledge, and ensure that state legislatures have a cohesive voice in the federal system. We do this because we believe in the importance of the legislative institution and know when states are strong, our nation is strong. And NCSL is the only organization serving all 7,386 state legislators and more than 30,000 legislative staff. This slide summarizes the services that we provide, including research, training, giving states a voice in DC, and last but certainly not least, NCSL creates regular platforms for leading discussions on some of the nation's most pressing issues, including our legislative summit, which is our annual meeting. While no major federal legislation enactments focusing on regulating AI use and/or protecting people from the potential harms of AI and other automated systems appear imminent, states are moving ahead to address potential harms from these technologies. And bipartisan efforts in state legislatures seek to find a balance between protections for citizens while enabling innovation in providing state government services and commercial services. Using the next few slides, I'll highlight some state AI legislation enactments from 2019 to the 2023 legislative sessions. While I'm using various categories to track all of the legislation, I'm focusing today on the bill highlights directed at government use of AI, with an emphasis particularly on government inventories, law enforcement use, and facial recognition bills. So let's start with the government inventories. As states have been creating task forces and commissions to study AI, several states have moved to request or require an inventory of how AI is currently being used across state agencies. Given that some states are more decentralized in their management, information technology, in their agencies and their resources across their agencies, determining the different ways that agencies are already using AI can be really helpful if the legislature is interested in setting statewide AI governance policies for for their whole state. And in 2022, Vermont enacted legislation that created the Division of Artificial Intelligence within their existing Agency of Digital Services to review all aspects of AI that's developed, employed, or procured by the state. And the Director of Artificial Intelligence will administer that division, and along with an Artificial Intelligence Advisory Council that provides advice and counsel to the director. And this act requires that Division of Artificial Intelligence propose a state code of ethics on the use of AI in state government and make recommendations to the General Assembly on policies, laws, and regulations of AI in state government. And this act also requires the Agency of Digital Services to conduct an inventory of all the automated decision systems that are developed or employed within the state. And in 2021, Washington originally provided funding for the state chief information officer to convene a work group to examine how automated decision-making systems can be reviewed and periodically audited to ensure that they're fair, transparent, and accountable. Then following in 2022, the legislature added a requirement for the state CIO to prepare and make publicly available on its website an initial inventory of all automated decision systems being used by state agencies. Then this year in 2023, California enacted legislation requiring their State Department of Technology, in coordination with other interagency bodies, to conduct a comprehensive inventory of all high-risk automated decision systems, as they defined it in the bill, that have been proposed for use, development, or procurement, or is being used or developed or procured by all the state agencies. Rhode Island, again this year, adopted a resolution requesting their State Department of Administration and their Office of Information Technology to review and evaluate the use and development of AI and automated decision systems and provide recommendations regarding ongoing and upcoming plans to expand their use and current security and implementation procedures. And of course, as you're aware, Connecticut, required their State Department of Administrative Services to conduct an inventory of all systems that employ AI and are in use by any state agency. And beginning on February 1st, 2024, the department shall perform ongoing assessments of systems that employ AI and are in use by state agencies to ensure that no such system shall result in any unlawful discrimination or disparate impact. Oops, I forgot that slide, sorry. Turning to the second government use, AI is being deployed in the criminal justice arena. And while algorithm use can be challenging when used to determine bail, sentencing, or the likelihood of offender recidivism, because of the sensitivity of those decisions regarding individual privacy and rights, many judicial experts posit that AI programs can expedite criminal investigations through gunshot detection and crime mapping to solve crimes more quickly and keep communities safer. And when carefully deployed, predictive risk analysis, which plays to the strengths of machine learning, automated reasoning, and other forms of AI, can improve law enforcement's ability to more efficiently allocate resources, deter criminal activity, and track and capture criminals and terrorists. And looking at the legislation so far, in 2019, Idaho provided requirements and restrictions for pretrial risk assessment algorithms. In 2020, Maryland required a jurisdiction that uses an instrument to assist in determining the eligibility for pretrial release of an individual that's charged with a crime to conduct an independent validation study of that instrument that's used. And this year, in 2023, Arizona appropriated funds for an automated crime victim notification system, while Texas required their state criminal justice division to establish and administer a grant program to provide financial assistance to law enforcement agencies so that they can purchase or develop a crime victim notification system. And then moving to the third government use, facial recognition has been improving as the AI that analyzes the images has been improving, but facial recognition is not foolproof. And concerns with bias are amplified as researchers have found that facial recognition programs can fail disproportionately when used for women and people of color due to the models and the data which have trained the facial recognition systems. Within the criminal justice system, inaccuracies in these programs could lead to false arrests due to two things: false negatives that might yield no matches in a search, even though a true match does exist in the database, or false positives that yield incorrect matches despite whether a true match exists in that database. And biometrics and facial recognition data require both privacy and security considerations, just as other databases and electronic systems require. But unlike a password or a credit card number, a person's biometric data or their facial recognition really can't be changed or replaced if compromised in a database breach. And so some states have moved to address concerns about facial recognition by regulating its use. And as Senator Nguyen mentioned a few moments ago, in 2020, Washington State enacted one of the most comprehensive laws governing the use of facial recognition by state government. It prohibits state agencies and law enforcement from collecting or using a biometric identifier without first providing notice and obtaining an individual's consent. And state agencies must also establish security policies and meet certain requirements regarding the use, storage, and sale and sharing of biometric information. Colorado enacted similar legislation to Washington's in 2022. In contrast, Maine enacted legislation in 2021 that provides that public employees and officials may not obtain, use, retain, or search facial surveillance systems, with exceptions for serious crimes and investigations. In the same year as Washington's legislation, Vermont imposed a moratorium on the use of facial recognition by law enforcement. Then in 2021, the General Assembly went back and created an exception to the moratorium, allowing such technology when it pertains to the investigation into sexual exploitation of children. New Hampshire and Oregon have placed limits on the use of facial recognition analysis of body cameras that are worn by law enforcement. And Kentucky enacted legislation in 2022 to form a facial recognition technology working group with the charge to create and make publicly available a model policy for use by law enforcement by January 1st, 2024. And if you would like more examples of state regulation of the use of biometrics and facial recognition specifically by law enforcement, my colleagues who work on criminal justice issues have a database tracking legislative responses for policing where you can find additional information. And I'll provide towards the end, I have a slide with the link to that database. And states also use facial recognition technology to identify cases of driver's license fraud by comparing driver's license photos with other Department of Motor Vehicle images that are on file. And while most states use facial recognition and other biometric techniques to prevent abuses by driver's license applicants, a handful of states, including Maine, Missouri, and New Hampshire, prohibit collecting and using biometrics to produce a driver's license or an identification card. In addition to the law enforcement use and fighting fraud, state legislatures in Arizona, Illinois, Kansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Utah, and West Virginia enacted legislation requiring that schools obtain parental consent to collect and use biometric information from students. And in contrast, Colorado, Florida, Idaho, Missouri, New Hampshire, New York, North Carolina, Oklahoma, and Washington have prohibitions against the collection and use of biometric data. And before I shift gears to start sharing a few of the state use examples, there are two miscellaneous bills that I still wanted to highlight, even though they don't quite fit neatly into the three highlight areas that I have used. In 2021, Ohio created a pilot program to utilize automation and AI to provide Medicaid program savings by avoiding traditional cost structures. And in 2022, Maryland required their State Department of Information Technology to annually evaluate the feasibility of units of, state government providing public services using AI, machine learning, commercial cloud computing services, device as a service, procurement models, and other emerging technologies. And now that I have summarized recent state legislation, I just wanted to quickly sort of share some real world use examples. And from surveys that I've read and recent news articles.
You don't have to leave. You can eat lunch in here with me and listen to this.
Which one is it?
AI.
Could everyone please mute themselves if you're not speaking? Thank you.
Sorry about that. From the surveys and recent news articles, states appear to be moving forward with implementing AI through robotic process automation, natural language processing, and machine learning. And what I mean by robotic process automation is like digital assistants and chatbots, because they can deliver quick benefits for help desks and other areas because they can combine existing information and emerging AI technology while improving response time for residents. And so some quick examples of that is going back to COVID, over a single weekend in early April 2020, the Georgia Technology Authority deployed an off-the-shelf chatbot that they debuted on the Georgia Department of Labor's website, and then they ended up deploying it to other state agency sites. And in 1 year, that chatbot responded to 7.3 million questions from 4.4 million users. And after updates this year, the people using that chatbot now have access to intelligent call routing, which can connect them to actual live agents for unemployment assistance and other self-service tools. Another example is in Ohio, a purpose-built assistant called the Disability Onset Alert Bot helps eliminate backlogs that can clog the Ohio Benefits webpage, and which determines eligibility for public assistance. And in one 5-week period, the bot cleared 3,000 cases that had been built up and were waiting for processing. In Texas, the Department of Information Resources launched a digital asset application that's designed to improve citizen experiences and access to services. And it backends the texas.gov portal, which connects citizens with about 1,100 online services and processes about 2 million transactions a month. And this digital assistant helps citizens create secure, personalized accounts that can store their profiles, their credit card numbers, and other information to streamline their subsequent interactions with the website. And finally, by 2020, in response to the COVID pandemic, at least 35 states were using chatbots to support pandemic inquiries, health, unemployment benefits, taxes, SNAP benefits, and citizens services. Beyond chatbots and digital assistants, state and local governments are adding natural language processing applications. For example, the Presidio County Sheriff's Office, their 911 Emergency Services Department, which is in Western Texas, is testing AI-enabled live audio translation for emergency calls that makes it easier to understand callers that speak in other languages. And by the end of the year, Baltimore residents in Maryland who don't speak English will be able to communicate with 911 services in their native language without waiting for an interpreter. And the service will initially be supported in about 65 languages with the hopes of growing it to more than 100 languages. Separate from calling 911, virtual assistant in the Minnesota Department of Public Safety's Driver and Vehicle Services Division uses translation AI technology as part of their work to offer and it offers translation for Somali, Hmong, and Spanish languages. And the interactive chat feature allows users to access services such as updating their insurance, checking the status of their title, or checking on their driver's license directly within that chatbot. And the updates that were implemented for the Georgia Department of Labor's chatbot that I mentioned with the last slide includes that chatbot's ability to respond to voice and text prompts in several languages. And as machine learning technology is developing, so do the opportunities for the use by governments. In California, firefighters with CAL FIRE are using AI to help spot wildfires, feeding video from more than 1,000 cameras that are strategically placed across the state into a machine that then alerts first responders when to mobilize. In the summer, a camera spotted a fire that broke out at 3 a.m. local time in the remote Cleveland National Forest, which is about 50 miles east of East San Diego. And it alerted a fire captain who was able to call in about 60 firefighters. And within 45 minutes, they had put out the fire, and that prevented the fire from growing into a massive wildfire in the dark overnight. And California is not alone in using AI to detect fire. The Washington Department of Natural Resources has set up 11 stations with two 360-degree view ultra high definition cameras. And those cameras can detect smoke and fire starts within a 15-mile radius. And they can send images with topographical maps, including information on the nearest water source, and show how the wind is moving the fire. And Colorado had legislation this year that would have created a center of excellence so that they could develop this, so that they could take advantage of this technology as well. Unfortunately, that legislation did not pass. But fire detection is not the only use for machine learning. Back in California, the Los Angeles County of Health Services Homelessness Prevention Unit has a pilot program that's using AI to predict who's most likely to lose their homes, so that the county can step in to offer services and help before that happens. And the program tracks data from 7 county agencies, including emergency room visits, crisis care for mental health, substance abuse disorder diagnosis, arrests, and signups for public benefits. And then using the machine learning, it comes up with a list of people that are considered most at risk for losing their homes. And it sends that list to 16 case managers who can then reach out to contact those people on the list to offer them help and services. And back in Baltimore, in Maryland, the Baltimore City Department of Housing and Community Development is testing the use of an AI algorithm to automatically detect rooftops showing signs of damage or collapse, using the city's existing code enforcement data and GIS aerial flyover imagery to help flag buildings for possible emergency demolition. And before I wrap up, now that you've heard what legislatures are doing research regarding government use of AI and a whole bunch of use examples, I wanted to wrap up by quickly summarizing some recent survey data from the state CIOs. The Center for Digital Government, IBM, and the NASCIO, the National Association of State CIOs, has been surveying state CIOs and state chief technology officers on achieving the promise of AI. And the surveys seek to understand the state CIOs' motivations, their plans, and their challenges around AI adoption. And like private sector use of AI, state CIOs and CTOs see potential benefits in increased efficiency, productivity gains, enhanced customer service, and greater protections from fraud and cyber risks. On the flip side, they see challenges in overcoming shortfalls of legacy IT infrastructure, a lack of necessary staff skill sets, and department culture concerns such as, the employees' fear of personnel reductions. They also see gaps in data governance policies regarding privacy and responsible use as a challenge. And while AI can help defend against cyber risks, it can be used to develop more sophisticated cyber attacks as well. And now that I've highlighted all the recent state government enacted government use legislation and some use examples for you. On this slide, here are a few of the links for the state legislative tracking that I maintain on AI and consumer data privacy, as well as the legislative responses to policing that my criminal justice colleagues cover. And I've also provided a link to the AI primer that the NCSL's Task Force on Artificial Intelligence, Cybersecurity, and Privacy produced just this summer. As I'm winding up my presentation, here's a quick shameless plug for the upcoming Forecast 24. I know, Senator Moroni, it's required.
Oh, you have to.
And we're meeting in Austin, and we're going to have sessions on technology, including AI, in case you're interested in attending. And then as well, I would be remiss in my shameless plugs if I didn't also share opportunities and suggestions for how you can access NCSL's resources. And finally, at last, thank you to the chairs of the task force and for the opportunity to provide you testimony, this presentation on recent state legislative and activities regarding the government use of AI. And I'm happy to answer any questions and provide additional information. And I've provided my contact information on this last slide for you. Thank you.
Heather, thank you very much for your presentation. Let me see if, and will you share that slide deck with us so that we can send it out?
Absolutely.
So we'll send that out to all the members along with Heather's contact information. And thank you to Heather and to Susan from NCSL. They've both presented, and NCSL is assisting us in a number of ways, but one of the things they're doing is research for us regarding existing discrimination statutes in all of the states, because it's often you hear people saying that rather than creating a new law, to go look at the existing statutes, right? And just adding algorithmic discrimination within those statutes. So thank you for all of your help. I don't see any questions. So if we have your contact information, again, we'll get that out so people may follow up with questions afterwards. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And okay, next, Mark and Adele. So Mark Raymond from CTDAS, and then Adele Abaid from OPM. They're going to talk about the progress on, so Heather had mentioned Connecticut's SB 1103 that we passed last year. One of the requirements was to have the state develop policies and procedures governing state use of AI.
Senator, if you don't mind, we actually had plugged the Washington team into the noon slot.
Oh, okay.
That update may not have gotten all the way to you, and we're planning to be able to present at 12:30. So Nick Stowe and Katie Ruckel, I think, would prefer to go into the noon slot.
Great, thank you very much. So I apologize for that. So we're going to start with Nick Stowe and Katie Ruckel. Katie is the Chief Privacy Officer for Washington State. This August, Washington State put out regulations governing the state use of generative AI. I think one of the first ones I had seen, I believe that I've since read the Seattle and Boston, but I think they were the first state who put out policies, procedures governing state use of generative AI. So if you'd like to take over, Katie and Nick, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Can you hear me okay and see my screen?
Yes, we can hear you and see your screen.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me. And thanks, Mark. I do have a hard stop at 9:30 my time, 12:30 your time, but Nick will be here to kind of pick up the slack. So I'm the Chief Privacy Officer of Washington, and Nick Stowe is the Chief Technology Officer of Washington. And together we co-chair the Artificial Intelligence Steering Committee, which then directs the artificial intelligence community of practice in Washington. And so I do have a slide deck But I wasn't going to necessarily just go through all the slides and speak to each slide because I was able to be here with Senator Wynn when Senator Wynn presented, and I'm happy to be here to answer any questions that the task force has, as does Nick. The guidelines that we put out are specific to generative AI. And I'm just going to quickly allow Nick to introduce himself really quick. I'll pull his slide up here. Nick, are you on the call?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you and see you.
All right. So my name is Nick Stowe. I've been the state chief technology officer for Washington State since around March of this year. Before that, I served as the chief architect for the state, and then as the CIO for a couple of different state agencies. As with many technologists, you'll see I'm a Washingtonian. I am also a nerd, which I think is a requirement these days for many of us who work in technology. Specifically, the portfolio, my responsibilities are all statewide programs focused on data, cloud, innovation, and emerging technology, including artificial intelligence. And then Katie kind of clarified the role that she and I share in leading the state. We have a steering committee and community of practice that are made up of state and local government representatives. So we're kind of focused on a statewide approach to AI. The first product from that community were the interim guidelines that Senator Moroni mentioned earlier. I think one other thing that is helpful in terms of my background is as the CIO for the Employment Security Department during the pandemic, who was responsible for distributing unemployment benefits. We had a lot of experience with kind of rapidly developing and deploying different kinds of algorithms to either identify, detect, and fight fraud, or to get benefits out to residents quickly. So I know kind of firsthand the benefits and the drawbacks and the challenges in developing algorithms to help our residents.
Thanks, Nick. And I'll just quickly give a little bit about my background. So I've worked for the state of Washington for 17 years. I am a lawyer, not a technologist, but I have learned quite a bit about technology in the time that I've worked for the state of Washington, because I started in contracts, which had me working with our security people in terms of putting security provisions into our contracts for data sharing and those types of things. I became the privacy officer for the largest state agency for health and human services, and then became the state chief privacy officer in 2020. My role is actually created by statute in Washington. RCW's Revised Codes of Washington is what that stands for. And there's a lot of duties that I have, but how they interact, I think in the AI space specifically, I'm responsible for putting in privacy principles for state agencies and integrating those into best practices in terms of how they're treating data in the agencies, which a lot of those privacy principles overlap with a lot of the responsible AI principles that you see. I have a requirement to review major projects that process personally identifiable information. And then, of course, I work closely with cybersecurity and our state CISO on data breaches, data protection, those types of issues. So the other piece of my background that I think is relevant to part of this conversation, and I'm just going to skip ahead in the slide deck here, that's why I have it on thumbnail view, is that in 2021, I actually led the automated decision systems work group. So this was created before all of the Gen AI and focus on AI hype. But we had conversations that are very, very similar to the ones we're having today. And we actually, so it was a bill in Washington that was created to regulate automated decision systems. The bill didn't pass, but it turned into a proviso to create the work group. So we were given $12,000 to write a report and solve algorithmic bias for the state of Washington. So of course, no small task. So the $12,000 paid for the minutes, which was great. We had a lot of productive conversations, and the work group included the ACLU, it included academics, it included technologists, it included other advocacy organizations for different populations. And so we had a lot of robust conversations. I will tell you where we didn't agree as a work group was on the definition for what an automated decision system was. And so that's really sort of the devil in the details, is what is AI, what is ADS? Because on the advocacy side, the definition was so broad to include formulas and Excel spreadsheets. And then on the other side, it gets into the real deep learning, machine learning, AI, true predictive analytics, and those types of things. So we couldn't quite agree on a definition, but we did still come up with recommendations as a work group, which included the 7 that I have listed here, and there is a link to the report. So I'm happy. I just wanted to give you all that background, and then happy to hear questions that you may have as a task force.
Great. Could you go in a little bit, just for the people who haven't read your regulations regarding the generative AI? And thank you again for the comment on the definitions. I think that's one thing that is always a sticking point in legislation, and I think you hit it exactly right, that there's going to be that balance so that we're not including, inadvertently including things that are low risk, right, in the definition, but we also don't want it to exclude, some of the activities. And I think that one of the concerns is if we go with solely automated, right, that you allow that if someone just pushes a button at the end, even though the majority of the decision was made before they push that button. So it's again, how do you strike that balance? But I think I do see a few hands, so we'll allow them to ask their questions now, and then if you could just talk. Actually, you have a hard stop, so if you would, I don't know if you or Nick would like to talk about the generative AI policies and procedures.
Sure, I'll leave it up to Nick. I put the slide up with the connection or the link, and we're happy to send this slide deck to the task force as well.
Great, thank you. All right, so we'll start then, Scott.
Hi, thanks, Senator, and thanks to Katie and Nick for the presentation, and congratulations to Nick on the new role. I wanted to follow up. I think Senator Morton asked partly about this, but how you manage the difference in definitions between stakeholders who thought, the Excel spreadsheet would be an example versus something that's truly meets the sort of core definition of AI. Just how you navigated that. Did you list out examples that said this is, we are not classifying this as AI, or just how you, handled the difference in views on what sort of constituted use of AI, or in this case, automated decisions?
So the way we navigated it was we essentially said we didn't agree. We put it in the report. We never came up with a consensus in terms of what our definition was. We were actually given a definition by the legislature, and even that definition, we could not as a work group agree on how to interpret it. And so that is part of the report. But then even without that agreement, we could still agree on what the recommendations would be. And that's why one of the first recommendations was prioritization of resources, because the state agencies were saying, look, we're not going to get all this done if we have to do an algorithmic accountability review on every single spreadsheet that the state uses. That's not a good use of resources. And so there was some concession. I would say that yes, we need to prioritize where we focus that review onto systems that really impact individuals' rights and freedoms, right? So not AI that's deciding what your PowerPoint looks like and what your font you're using. Things that are deciding what are the release restrictions for this person being put on parole. So, those are the two areas. So that's how we sort of said we don't agree on the definition, but we do agree that if we're going to assess these algorithms, they need to be where the highest risk is, which is part of the conversation you're having.
Thank you. Marion?
Thank you. Actually, Scott asked the first part of my question, but the second part has to do with what legacy data that you use to go into the algorithms for looking at data and for deciding what date do you go back to. So a lot of states have legacy archive data that can go back much farther than may be useful. And I'm wondering if your group looked at that at all and decided, listen, anything older than say 20 years is not going to be leveraged, that there's a certain cutoff date by which data becomes much less useful.
So yeah, I would say that our advocacy community did not want to put any boundaries on how far back we went if there was impacts today. But we did try to say that we would do an inventory. So I think that that's something else you're talking about in terms of inventorying the systems that we have, which is still has been a challenge, just having the expertise, and this was something that I think Senator Wynn alluded to in terms of even being able to identify the systems that would possibly be ADS. There's been a lot of concern about rules-based systems and those types of things. Like, you know, look, we have to program it this way. It's a legacy system and it's if then that. And that comes from federal guidelines and regulations, and it's very black and white computational type pieces versus the more AI piece of predictive analytics and those types of things. So there was definite tension there. But I still think that the way we were talking about it then, one of our guidelines was procurement. So we want to put guidelines around more, I think, direct guidelines on procurement on future systems. And then that goes back to the prioritization of the systems that are having the most impact on individuals now, like where benefits are and those types of things, to prioritize those for review first. And then, you know, there is the concern though of impacting systems that are more rule-based. Thank you.
Nick?
Yeah, Katie and Nick, first, thank you for your incredible careers in public service. And I don't want you to take this question the wrong way, Katie, but it seems to me that with all this intelligence, did you not understand when you took this task on that it was going to have this kind of an outcome? Or did something change while you took this task on to get you to almost this like stalemate? We're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. I'm just a little surprised given how thoughtful and how, you know, incredibly knowledgeable you all are on this topic, that you didn't get further ahead. And that just could be my naive Western Connecticut, thinking. Can you comment on that? Did something change that pivoted this? It would have seemed to me that you would have known all of this going in, but maybe that's, again,
I
your
don't
comments.
think anything changed. I mean, I think the conversation has really moved forward because this was in 2021 that we started this ADS work. And I think there was just a concern about the regulation on legacy systems, which I think the other senator was mentioning. So I will tell you that there was a bill, and I actually testified against it because the way the bill was written, it would have prohibited the use of some of our benefit systems if they didn't go through this algorithmic review. And from our perspective as a state, there was a concern that that would actually impact individuals more, have a more detrimental effect than a potential for any bias or discrimination in the system, because they wouldn't be getting funds for assistance, things that they need, you know, the TANF programs and those types of things. And so we just weren't ready to go as far as the advocates were. And so we had to we slowed down.
Thanks for your candor.
Thank you. Fahid?
Thank you, Katie, for this wonderful presentation. And of course, the issue of defining AI and the scope of regulation is very much alive in today's discussion in our committee as well. But Katie, I want to ask about privacy when it comes to generative AI. In your group's discussions and in the interim guidelines that came out of it, how was privacy approach? Was there a framework that was recommended for ensuring that private data is not used for training, or if it is used, the trained model is verified not to leak the private information? Was there differential privacy and data aggregation issues discussed as part of this framework?
Yeah, so the privacy, I'll just skip down a couple slides, is one of the values or guiding principles, and it's from the NIST AI risk management framework. That's really what drove our guidelines and principles. Most of the guidance, and I was happy to sort of see this, and I laughed kind of when I saw some of the final versions. All of our do's and don'ts are don't put confidential information into public models. Basically, like that's every don't that we have. And I tried to reinforce that. One, for privacy reasons, obviously, and breaches, and actually Washington has a state law that it's actually an ethical violation to share those. So for state employees, you're risking violating our ethics law if you do use confidential private information in the public models. I've had more, or commercial models, I should say. I've had more recent conversations with entities such as Microsoft about how we're ensuring the data that's used to train these models are only, for the state's use. It stays within our environment and inherits all of the compliance and security controls and the data segregation pieces. So I was assured that was the case. And then I am a lawyer, and I was like, that's great. Thanks for telling me. I would love to see the contracts with that language. So that's sort of following up with ensuring that we're able to meet those expectations in terms of using the state's data, especially about our residents, to train models and use those models.
Thanks, Katie. And I know this is, I think, the last question for you, because I know you have that hard stop. So, Christian?
Great. Hey, Katie, it's been a while. I hope you're doing well. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
Question for both you and Nick. Sort of curious what prompted the generative AI guidelines. Was it a sense that agencies are sort of formally going under contract to sort of with vendors that are offering generative AI services, or just an assumption that there's like a lot of shadow IT out there and that employees are likely to make use of these tools, and so wanting to get ahead of some of those issues? And sort of where I was going with that, what you sort of, Katie, got into it. I mean, I think these public offerings have a lot of privacy sort of issues that you really need to think a lot about. When you get an enterprise deployment, like there are ways to sort of resolve those. But if this is really like the guidelines are more about kind of the shadow IT and like off the books usage of generative AI, those are big considerations. So anyways, let me just curious what you might have learned in sort of developing these.
Yeah, and I will pass it off to Nick, but we started with the generative AI guidelines, and they are intentionally interim because we expect to need to update them, but mostly because as the leading agency for IT for the state, we were really being leaned on by our state agencies saying, what can we and can't we do? And so that's where that came from. But we did also look at other municipalities and guidance that was out there, and there's all referenced in our guidelines. And there were other conversations about concerns about use of AI and those types of things. So we do have it in our guidelines that people should attribute when they've used AI and how to sort of attribute it and those types of things to be transparent in that way. And I just put up the slide really quick because we are having use cases, and the NCSL, I think her name was Heather, she presented and on the wildfire and seagrass and chatbots, and those are types of use cases. But I'm really sorry. I want to talk more, but I have to run to an interview that I have to be on a panel. And if I'm late, then I can't do any of the interview. So I have to go to that panel. So
Thank you
it was
so
so
much.
nice. And I'm going to pass it off to Nick. And I will get the slide deck and links to all of the information, and I'll get it over to MJ and Mark. So thank you.
Katie, thank you so much. And Nick, if you don't mind answering a few questions. First, let me say that I love that you include that you're a dad and a nerd in your bio. So I think the most important job I have is father, right? And I think that any of us who are fortunate enough to have children, that's our most important job. So thank you for putting that there. I have a few questions. One, the community of practice, was that created by legislation, and how does that work? So I'm assuming that it's between you and the other local governments. I think you have county government in Washington. We don't have county government in Connecticut, but is it between you, the municipal, the county governments, or is private industry included? If you could talk about, that's something I'm interested in. And then I do have some more specific questions regarding your your policies and procedures.
Yeah, so I'll start with this is a really quick snapshot of, you could balance between community of practice and center of excellence. We have found a lot of value. I'm actually going to kind of add on to the response, kind of bridge Christian's question with yours. One of the reasons this came up is, and one of the reasons we published these guidelines and established this community is for emerging technology like this, where we are at, AI itself has been around since the 50s, but generative AI, I think, since around 2020. And so for emerging technology like this, that's on like the hype roller coaster, we really feel there's a lot of value in getting practitioners, or at least people who are close to the work, connected. And so that was what really for emerging technology. We have communities of practice for other disciplines, like project management and business architecture. But for AI, just in our approach to emerging technology or areas like this, we find that this is an effective structure, and it was not required in statute. This is a little bit more robust, a little bit more guided and organized. A lot of community practices you may not see a steering committee. And this was because we see that the community of practice very quickly got to a very large number of members. One of the other principles that we've been working on is establishing closer relationships between state and local government in many different areas. You see that a lot in cyber with cyber grant programs, but also, so that's one of the reasons why we intentionally added county, and we've got some public utilities and some city representatives. In our guidelines, we even established this community of practice exists. If you would like to join and are a member of the public sector, we just ask that you have authority to speak on behalf of your organization, because we do have objectives and outputs from this community of practice. The guidelines being the first one. We don't currently have what I would call unstructured industry engagement. So the approach that we are taking is we're just now starting. We're going to be bringing members of industry in to present to the community of practice, and not focused on products, but more focused on approaches and based on the topic. So as an example, we have some subcommittees that are focused on use cases, some that are focused on risk. And so we're going out to industry members who have experience in that area and saying, could you come in and present to us on implementing governance controls and a risk framework for specifically for generative AI, or maybe for a deep learning algorithm. And so I think the other thing that this is very for any potential legislation that we see in the coming session, and I think you heard from Senator Nguyen earlier around what the Washington State Legislature is thinking. We also see that the steering committee and the community of practice can be a really good kind of focused piece of input for potential policy or draft policy that comes out. Not oftentimes, I think back maybe 10 years or so when the cloud was new and exciting. we didn't always have this kind of organized functional, how much more efficient might it have been in drafting legislation or guidance on the adoption of cloud technology in state government if we had this kind of focused approach and existing community practice. So that's kind of the hopeful outcome of this community existing today.
Great, thank you. And I see, I mean, tremendous value just in that, last week I attended Middlesex Hospital. They had their annual meeting, they had a speaker, they have an affiliation with the Mayo Clinic. And so they had someone from the Mayo Clinic speaking on AI and its different uses in healthcare. But speaking with the vice president at Middlesex, they said what a value it was for them to have the Mayo Clinic to help them because they see all of these new technologies and in order to vet them. So I see, community of practice, right? If the municipalities, the smaller levels of government may not know what resources are worth it to use or may not have the time to invest in. So I think by aggregating that could be a value. So thank you for sharing that. Now with, again, I very much liked your policies and procedures, regarding the use of generative AI. I guess some of the questions that I would have, and I don't think there were issues on procurement. You didn't list that. I think that was in, I read yours, Boston and Seattle. We read them this morning. So I believe Boston was on procuring, you had to get approval before procuring anything and using it.
Excellent.
But I think the big issue there was making sure that you cited anytime that you would use AI. So
excellent.
citing and then who fact checked. Right, it's critical not just to cite when it was produced.
Excellent. Come on.
Who edited it, who fact checked it, and that has to be disclosed. Is that I guess my question is, one of the big issues as a legislator is email management, right? Managing all of the emails that are coming in. A lot of times they are generated by forms, right? Someone goes on and they sign a petition. They don't realize what it does is when you sign the petition, it generates a form email that it sends it to me to respond to or to their legislator. I've seen, when you look at, we talk about AI, the ability to help, as an assistant to make us more efficient, 30% more efficient. I think some people are citing. And as a legislator, I'd see if there's a way of prioritizing email but again, that wouldn't necessarily, how would that work within your guidelines for using generative AI? I've seen, obviously there are ways that you couldn't use a chat GPT, it sounds like, but maybe if the state had procured an enterprise, there would be a way, a method, or just thoughts on those uses of AI.
Yeah, I want to focus on there are a couple of principles. I think the EU AI Act and the Risk Management Framework both take a perspective of focusing on risk, impact, and data categorization as dimensions to look at when you're looking at any kind of. It's honestly not that dissimilar from our traditional IT governance processes. When you look at what's the business problem you're trying to solve, and what's the category of the type of data. So I think that's the first area. Public purpose and social benefit, I think, is one principle that I don't think is explicit in the risk management framework, but we think is really critically important. When you heard Katie talk earlier about automated decision systems, you heard her mention the specific focus on the impact to the rights and freedoms of individuals. I think that's the first, when we think about how would you use these principles to assess a potential use case, that's the first lens that we look at. And then the second one is probably, I'd say it's probably interpretation of valid and reliable, and that is looking at the category and the type of data that you're going to be using. And I think this is something that Scott and I have talked about in kind of our dealings in data things previously, but the underlying the value of a model or the training of a model is based on the category and the health and the type of data that you're training it on. And so I think that's the other thing that would be important. The third thing is around transparency. So especially in the use case that you cited, I think I've seen some guidelines that, given the state of the technology, effectively say, don't use any kind of generative AI products if there is any kind of relationship with the public, because a lot of them maybe haven't been vetted, or there are still reports of hallucinations, and public trust is a really critical and important value that you really don't have an option. It's really something that we cannot risk. And so I think that's where I look at some of the principles or practices that we have in either our facial recognition law or a biometric law that talk about engaging the public in these types of use cases and understanding how it might benefit them or it might impact them, and then being transparent around what the process would be, and how that tool might be used to more efficiently respond to constituents or to aggregate constituent information into themes that could impact policy. So I think those are you do have to do some, I don't know if you say gymnastics, but some, you can't take 10 principles and have a checklist to be like, all right, I'm going to use these 4 principles. You do, but there are a couple early on that I think are kind of global principles that help assess some of these potential use cases.
Thank you. And I mean, reading through the policies and procedures, your do's and don'ts, and I think one of the important things was, I think for legislators that we're creating a public record if you do that, and that being careful with sharing that data.
That's been a huge discussion in our community of practice too. Public records compliance is really, really important, especially when you're using, when public models like Bing Chat or ChatGPT are available for an individual to use. Public records and the retention of prompts and the outputs of prompts are really important. And so that's a big topic after publishing our guidelines, is an area where we realize we're going to need some focused guidance and additional either addendums to this policy or standards that help make sure that we're maintaining our alignment with the Public Records Act.
Nick, thank you so much for taking the time to present to us. And if it's okay, if you and Katie would share that slide deck, and if you're okay with sharing your contact information, or the best means if it's to go through someone else in your office, that would be great.
Yeah, we'll share the deck and our contact information. Happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, and have a good day.
Thanks.
Okay, Mark.
Great. Thank you, Senator, for having us here. Much appreciate the opportunity to present to this great group. As you know, the law that passed, Public Act 2316, had a couple of different elements to it, and we really divide them between sort of policy and technology implementation. So with me today, my name is Mark Raymond. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the state of Connecticut, working within the Department of Administrative Services, in which I'm also a deputy commissioner within that structure. With me is Scott Gall, who is the state's chief data officer from the Office of Policy and Management. Adele Abaid, who is a part of our team and intimately involved in this activity, is not able to join us today, but he is intimately involved in this effort. Well, so we're going to start today with just a few slides updating on where we are, and we'll break that up, talking first about our approach and principles as it relates to the policy work that we have underway, and then we'll pivot to the discussion of what we've done around technology implementation of the requirements that have been put in front of us. So hope you all appreciate Connecticut's new branding, in which we're using it for the presentation today. If you haven't had an opportunity to see it, it was announced just last week. So Scott, I will turn it over to you to get us going.
Okay, thank you, Mark, and thank you to the chairs for opportunity to present. And again, Adele can't be here, but is the architect of a lot of the thinking here. And I know all of us are happy to follow up afterwards. I'll talk about some of the policy questions for a couple of slides, and then we'll go and talk through the implementation of it in a few minutes. So here we're sort of talking about the way the state's thinking about approaching this. And first and foremost, we know what we have to do is make sure that the use of AI within the public sector by state government is something that's trustworthy, responsible, done ethically, and that people understand how it's being used by state government. But what we want to do is make sure that we strike a balance in the approach with that. So we've been thinking, using the phrase kind of innovating with intent, so that we are focused on what we can do within our purview in the public sector to make responsible use of AI, but also making sure that Connecticut is understood to be a state that's friendly to the use of AI, that we're supporting the positive use and development of use cases for AI within Connecticut. We know that the way the state approaches this through the setting of policies and procedures really can set a tone, and we want to make sure that the way that we approach this within the public sector sets the right tone for the state as a whole, and as it starts to move out beyond what the legislation requires us to undertake. We'll get to the next slide, Mark. Sorry, thanks. So this is a list of, I think, some of the considerations and topics that we have been starting to tackle for the development of the policies and procedures, the same kinds of things you've heard about from Washington and other states in this presentation. We're in the midst of developing right now as we speak to kind of hit the deadlines that are in legislation. So this is sort of a window into where the policy development process is and some of the topics that we know are under consideration. Again, sort of our first and foremost task is to make sure that within the public sector, when the state is using or considering the use of some type of artificial intelligence solution, that it is something that is transparent, that people know and understand how their data are being used. They know and understand if they're interacting with an application or some service that has AI that's embedded in it in some fashion, that they know that their rights as individuals to their own information is preserved, that we've got the ability to have human review whenever possible, to the extent possible, and the law really does a good job of encouraging us to be at the forefront on this, to the extent possible, that we're removing or mitigating the potential for bias before we deploy some solution from the state side. And then we're cognizant of the market in which we are operating, how we are developing, deploying the use of AI in state government, that the skills are things that are in very high demand currently, that we want to, again, set the right tone with the right policies and procedures, that we want to encourage innovation, but to do this with intention so that we are being responsible, but not sort of stifling the opportunities for innovation that are going to come in the next few years. I think earlier someone brought up the example of blockchain as something that has kind of generated a lot of excitement, has gone by the wayside. I think our feeling is that the artificial intelligence is not a fad. This is not something that's going to go away or vanish in a couple of years, and that this is something that we need to be on top of as a state and putting in place a good base of policies to, again, ensure responsible use within government, but that it sets a tone that the state as a whole is a place that is friendly towards experimentation, growth, and that we can try and identify and put in place the resources that we need to do that. So policy actions that there aren't, I think, the deadlines in the slides. I'll just talk through them briefly. But for those of you that have not committed Public Act 23-16 to memory, the deadlines there are that by the end of this calendar year, we'll inventory the use of AI within state government. That'll be public and shared back with this and anyone else that's interested in it. And by February 2024, we'll develop the policies and procedures, the ongoing assessment process, and start to put that into place for use of AI in by state agencies kind of going forward. So those are sort of the main deadlines that lines up with the sort of life cycle for this task force. So we'll develop the policies and procedures at the same time this task force is undertaking work, and hopefully can feed information from this group into the policy development process. And this presentation is a opportunity to do that. So we provided early guidance to agencies on use of AI early this summer, I guess, from OPM and DAS. Again, started collecting examples of either where AI is in current use or is something that an agency is thinking about. They're saying, I wish we could do this, or I heard about this case, or I saw that some other state was doing this. So we're trying to get that those examples pulled from agencies. We've got a cross-agency working group, which is very similar governance structure to what Nick and Katie talked about for Washington State, where there's sort of a core committee, slightly wider range of people. And I think we have the elements of a community of practice within state agencies developing. We've used that group, the examples that are coming from agencies, and the ability to consult with other national groups and other states to start to develop an outline of the policies and the structure for the policies and procedures that we'll produce by February. And the considerations in the previous slide are some of the elements that we want to make sure that we're attending to there. And last but not least, the one thing that we also know and acknowledge, and I think this has come up in some of the questions before, is that this is not something that the state has brought in a ton of staff with expertise in artificial intelligence. It's a topic we know people are interested in. They're interested in building capacity, gaining knowledge about it. So we've started educational briefings and outreach to agencies to make sure people kind of understand the lay of the land and where there's some opportunities for that, for folks to skill up within state government. So that's, Mark, if I missed anything, please amend me on that front, but that's sort of the policy aspects of where we are currently.
Thanks, Scott. And I did see a question in the chat, and I think we can, if we don't mind, we don't have too much more to cover in the technology section, and we'll cover all the questions at the end. I think it might be more productive. And so as we did have some technology needs that we had to discharge, one of the things we've done is the good news is we had an existing application inventory of the state's applications and had published it out to the open data portal. I'm not quite sure it got a lot of use from folks, but we have modified that inventory to begin to collect some additional information, and it basically these are the questions that we're asking. So, does the application use AI in any way? If it does, is that AI in use for something that approximates decision making? And if so, has an AI impact assessment been conducted for that system? And so we're in the process of collecting, vetting, sort of processing that data. We have close to 1,400 applications that we have in the state. We've got 5 answers of yes right now that those things are in use. We have 833 applications that the answer is no, and then we have another 544 that are still in the process of being assessed, and we're collecting data on it. So really incomplete at this time. It took us a little while to get started and get the information out on how it need to be collected, because we don't have our policies fully done. The guidance around what an impact assessment should be and should not be is a little open. So we're using some industry work around impact assessments, at least until we can get a final set of guidelines out there for agencies to use. And so we know that there's several hundred types of potential use cases for AI in state government, and so we expect this to grow and change. And I think as we're looking at it now, one of the primary concerns for us to upkeep and continue to keep this kind of inventory accurate is how quickly the underlying technology is changing. There's not I'm not sure that there's a technology company that's out there today that is not looking at or baking in artificial intelligence to some part of their product set. And so for things that we use already, where yesterday there might not be artificial intelligence in it, tomorrow there may be. And so how do we keep that on top of that underlying change within our environment and continue to have this inventory information accurate is a challenge for us to continue to work with. I don't necessarily want to spend a time on possible use cases. I thought we had some things where we heard some great things already today. So I'll say that what I wanted to communicate here is we're really sifting our thinking about, hey, how to use it safely, effectively, efficiently today, and what may be more difficult for us to do. And so we are sifting those potential use cases into things that are, what are the uses of data in which we can consider publicly available. So, things like statutes, which there's a lot in government that we publish out there. Language, natural language, we heard about that earlier in the sessions today. Version comparisons of publicly available information, helping to summarize data or making it more understandable. For things that we publish, we see those as more easily attainable use cases. For those sort of data that we consider private, PII, PHI, anything that could be somewhat identifiable down to an individual, we know that open models are not acceptable for us in the use, and so the pursuit of bespoke data models, those that are just for us, that we have the ability to make sure that we know that we're not leaking data out to other places, that we need to eliminate the model use because they've been contaminated in some way or they're not operating as we should. We look at all of those use cases as those areas in which we need to be much more careful, and that those sort of rules of the road around usage that we can educate our agencies on, that those are part of what we need to address when we think about our overall use cases. So that was it that we sort of wanted to cover to discharge where we were, and would love to take questions that are either coming up in chat or things that folks have their hands raised. So Senator, whichever way that you would prefer us to handle that.
Yeah, so let's start with the hands that are raised. So we'll start with George.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Mark. I must say, on behalf of everybody here, we don't envy you, your role that you have for the next 5 or 10 years that we have to tackle this. Going back to the earlier slides, I wonder if you could share with the committee or the task force, as we call it. You have established a cross-agency working group. Could we have some access to some of that conversations or meeting notes so that the committee could digest some of that information as well? And the second item here is, it says you developed an outline of policies for use of AI. That is something that I would be keen to actually digest as well and identify what are the key points that you have, which could help our committee as well to try and configure our own recommendation from those two aspects. And finally, the third is, for me perhaps, and maybe for the other members of the working group, a peek at your application inventory to see how it is structured, how are the points established, and see if that's maybe we can provide some recommendations, and maybe we can also provide constructive guidance and criticisms, or whatever you may want to call it, because we all are looking to protect the state in some shape and form.
Yeah.
So more minds coming to help the DAS on this task in some shape. So those are the three requests that I actually want to put out to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate your feedback. The work of the cross-agency working group today is really around the definition and the fleshing out of what those policies are. Right now, we consider them to be in draft format, and so I think there's a natural tension behind this task force and the work of the policy work that needs to be done. That we expect to when those elements are in form where they can be open to comments and they're not sort of just in flight, that we would fully expect this group to weigh in on those and look forward to that. And as is the intent to publish the application inventory and make it available. We find that that feedback into the work that we're doing is invaluable for us to get it right. So thank you.
Thank you. Nick?
Yeah, so Mark and Scott, thank you very much for your, not only this presentation, but your public service. So we appreciate that. I'll build a little bit off of what George said, Mark and Scott. So, CASE does exist in the state of Connecticut. I would hope that as you do this work, you might think about whether you want to take full advantage of the Connecticut Academy of Science and Engineering. I'm a member, so I'm getting a plug-in for CASE, but it is modestly funded by the state of Connecticut. So Mark, you might want to think about that. And it does represent a very, very broad-based set of institutions, across the entire state. And I guess I would piggyback off of Nick's comments, like at some point in time, this is great work, but you probably do need to be a little bit more public facing and probably get more input, from other people before you actually, lock down on what you're doing. And I'm sure you will do that. Whether we can help you or not, that's entirely up to you as a task force. My punchline, though, is, Mark, it's all about the data. I think Senator said that in the beginning of this whole meeting. It is the data. I mean, the algorithm is the algorithm. I mean, you understand it. You can take it apart, put it back together again, but the results are all based on the data you feed it. And therein lies one of my bigger concerns for you, is make sure you're focusing on the provenance, the authenticity, whatever word you're most comfortable with respect to the data, because to the degree that the data is contaminated, I don't care how good you are, your results are going to come out screwed up. They're going to come out biased. And I'm sure you know that, Mark, given your background. I would hope that as you build out policy, make sure that someone is focusing on the provenance, the record file, who touched it, where was it, how do we know? Because believe me, the bad people who are going to try to in some way, shape, or manner compromise these systems, they know that. And that's how they're going to get what they want, Mark. So I didn't mean to lecture you. I apologize. You could have probably given me this lecture. But I get very upset about, it's so easy to go to where the shiny object is. The real issue here is the data and how real, I'll use that word, how truthful it is. I'll stop there, Mark. Good luck to you. If I can help in any way, shape, or manner, independent of this activity, sign me up.
I appreciate the offer and the guidance, Nick. One of the reasons I really love the group that we've assembled for this is, Scott Gall is our state data officer, chief data officer, and I think shares some similar concerns and perspectives, and he's been a sort of great partner in this. Scott, I think you might want to weigh in on this a little bit.
Yeah, I want to cover one of the things from Nick and generally to the comments from both Nick and George. I think this task force or working group is a great way for us to make sure that we're paying attention to the right topics. CASE, I think, would fall into the same class. So we're very interested in sort of getting advice and guidance from others. One of the things that we're doing, without going too much into the weeds, I guess. So one of the things we do in the state now is we inventory both data that's collected from residents, businesses, property owners, et cetera. Every time you fill out a form or you give some data to the state, we catalog and inventory that. And we do the same thing for applications, software, when the agencies use technology. We do them separately because often they're not connected to each other, which is an room for growth for the state, but we have to keep track of both things. So one of the things we'll do as part of this process is make sure that when state data is being used in some type of application, that we know when that's occurring, and that those two cataloging, inventorying efforts are connected to each other, and we can say, okay, you filled out this form, you enrolled your kid in school, or you applied for something, you got a fishing license, and that's connected to an application that is using AI as a solution, or there's embedded AI or something like that, that we can draw that connection between when residents provide their information to the state and how it's getting used in some type of AI solution. So that's an opportunity opportunity. It's not sort of strictly required through what's in the legislation, but we think this is a good opportunity for us to make sure that we're bridging some of those gaps. I think to the comments from Senator Wynn, the very beginning of the meeting, a lot of what you see in the generative tools is data that is outside of the state's control. They're scraping the web, they're pulling things from the internet. We have, for better or worse, little to no control over how those things are done. So what we can do, again, is put in place guidance, policies, and procedures for agencies to understand that, to make sure that they're cognizant of the limitations of where the data is coming from. But I want to sort of separate where the data is in the state's control. It's being given to the state by residents for some, hopefully beneficial purpose, and then when the data is embedded in an AI solution that we have little to no control of, but we can at least tell people so that they understand before they deploy it. I hope that's responsive to part of what you're talking about.
Thank you very much, Mark and Scott. Okay, next, Vahid.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Scott. A couple of quick questions. One is related to Nick's comments. Does the state currently follow or implement any sort of tracking in terms of chain of custody when it comes to data sets, chain of custody as well as versioning? And the second question is about the current criteria. The criteria adopted in the current survey of the inventory for identifying a software application as an AI or AI-enabled tool.
Scott, do you want to take a shot at either one of those?
Yeah, I can cover the first, and the second, I think, maybe goes into the inventory cataloging part. So the first, at an enterprise level, so for like Mark said, there's about 1,400 applications the state has, and there's about the same number of data sets because, again, they line up well, but not perfectly. So at an enterprise level, for the I think 12 or 1,300 different data sets that the state collects for some sort of policy purpose, there are places where we have, I think what you're talking about, which is a best practice and what we would look for, some way of chain of custody, tracking the lineage, the provenance of the data. We don't have it at an enterprise level because of the way data is collected for largely administrative and operational purposes through lots and lots of different programs that are run through different state agencies. So it's not an across the board approach. We're looking at, I think, the policy development process more generally to find out ways that we can start to classify, inventory, catalog things with a little finer grain so that we can get a handle on that. But at the enterprise level, we don't currently have that. And the second part of the question, I think, is about how we categorize embedded AI when it's in a solution versus sort of an AI solution. I think that's covered in the inventory process. But if I missed the question, or Mark, if that's correct.
Yeah, it was just we do have a set of field definitions. I was just trying to access that around, how to help that provides instructions on how the application owners are able to answer those questions. And so trying to see if I can pull that up quickly. We don't, at least from what I'm able to pull up right now, I can't provide any more sort of clarity around the simple question. We do use the statutory definition for artificial intelligence, and so the statute called out what sort of that means. And then it's up to each individual application owner to apply that to does that system, that's at use in the system, meet that definition. So it's probably being interpreted too many times individually to have some initial consistency to it. And again, as I talked about earlier, that's going to continue to change as our applications change.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Dr. B.
Well, hi. Thank you, Mark and Scott, for your great information and your service to the state. I have several questions. I think these questions were already touched upon by early questions, but let me just reiterate. So I'm curious to know, in your early guidance, and you have a cross-agency workshop. So have you thought about like multiple categories of guidance to address different kinds of concerns? For example, some applications maybe you would really worry about the privacy leakage, and some applications may create a bias or disparity, and some are really sensitive to data authenticity. So I wonder, we're looking at the guidance that's in several categories. So that's one question. Another question is the risk assessment, impact assessment. So because right now, a lot of the tools like ChatGPT, the generative AI, so the algorithms sitting in the automation system are constantly evolving. So today you assess the impact you make at one solution, but maybe half a year later or a year later, the situation changed. So I wonder, like, how often, or do you want to track the situation, or how often you have to assess the risk?
Yeah, great questions. The first is that, in our a little bit of the discussion around, hey, privately available data or publicly available data use cases, that's one of the ways that we're thinking about it. Because those policies and procedures are still in draft form right now, I would say it's too early for us to be providing that kind of precision to it. But we do understand both the need to regularly validate in models that may have the ability to drift, and so that they're learning along the way, that we have to regularly validate that model. But we, the other implementation set that we find will more easily be able to step into are where we use some of this technology to then create curated responses. And so a great example is in how we think about our chatbots today. So when we work with chatbots, traditionally it's people are looking at the kinds of questions that are asked, they're generating responses, someone reviews them, they get them out the door. We don't think that right now plugging a large language model into a chatbot to give direct responses to the public is a great place for us to be. We do see a utility in using those models to better understand the questions that are being posed, but in order to get them to curated responses that Gen AI may help us put together, but we still need human review before they make it into a publicly available set of responses, right? And so we see that as a way of controlling and being able to test those underlying responses in a controlled manner before we expose them out to the public. We are in instances where people, the guidance that Office of Policy and Management put out with DAS around, if you're thinking about use today, here's the following areas. We implore them to have a conversation, and we do not put them into use until we've had those conversations. And those conversations are a little bit like we're just discussing now. What's the impact? What kind of data? If you're not quite sure on how that's going to be controlled for drift, we don't want it put into operation. And so the use cases that we have come up are, things around review of documents in adherence to contract conditions. Like, do they meet the conditions of a contract or not? The generation of chatbot content. So it's really not things that in a current instance are largely touching private data. But again, we still have over 500 applications that we're still in the analysis stage on. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Huang?
Thank you, Senator Maroney. Thank you for your great work. And this is extremely helpful information. And Mark, thank you for your vision and the great work you've done. We've talked quite a bit. That being said, we've touted the benefit of AI, and this task force takes a look at some of the concerns and pitfalls, one of which is obviously the social equity concerns because the algorithm built up is based upon the information put in. But one of the biggest concerns that I don't think we've talked a lot about is the fact that we are a state agency, or nonprofits or public administration has expertise built in systems. And we are very reliant on it, and there's a unique kind of a structure, unlike in private industry where they can implement policies based upon business needs. We have an expertise driven system. And so when you're looking at utilizing their expertise to build the algorithm of data points, I can see that there may be some reluctance to be able to give up that degree of expertise and control. And ultimately, if they do too good of a job, is the possible displacement of their expertise in AI. So has there been any consideration? I know there's quite a bit of academic research in regards to how the expertise system of public administration, government, and nonprofits have built into that kind of discretion in the policy decision making. And if AI does indeed displace that, will we have to go through collective bargaining? Would we have to be able to build in some anticipation? I haven't heard a lot of discussions about that, but it is a real implication, because ultimately you're looking at individuals with experience and long-term expertise and discretion with unique cases that is needed to build up into the algorithm of that calculus. And they may be reluctant to participate because ultimately, if they do it too well, they can lose their jobs. Just a thought.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments. I think when we think about technology use in general, whether it's AI or not, oftentimes we think about it as a power tool, right? And so if we have people who use hammers, roofers who use hammers, the AI and some of our advanced technologies are more like nail guns. They're not replacing the people who are doing the work, but they're making the work that they do much more efficient. And that's our ongoing goal in government. We always have more demands for our services, more people that need it. And it's incumbent on us to be more efficient, not to replace the human, but to help them do their jobs more better. Our legislature, for good or bad, right, continues to pass laws that make our world more complex. Like, they just have to be accounted for. And so the idea that we're leveraging technology that help us provide better outcomes to that, I think is what we need to do, and we need to do carefully. So I do look at some of these technologies as a way that that human response, they will also allow us to test those responses. Actually, we have an entire function in government called auditing, right? That is testing our functions, mostly human decision making, to say whether there's bias happening in those. I think these technologies can help us identify all of those decisions, both machine aided or human made, to have us provide better government services. What they provide for us is scale, and for our job is to help manage that scale so that we're not harming more than we're helping in the process. And so we know that these technologies, when applied correctly, will help both our employees and the public in their outcomes. It's just a really exciting and scary place as all of these parameters are changing around us. But I can't comment on whether there'll be labor implications on that. I do know for sure that having people who understand how to use these and what they mean are going to create better outcomes for both our employees and in the meaningful work that they do, and for the citizens who desperately need our services.
I appreciate your answer, and that's very helpful, because I think it's not displacing the talented people we have in state government, but allow them to do other bits of important work and expand capacity, so we can shorten review times from 6 months to 3 weeks. And I think that is a proper tack to take. And I appreciate your insight on that. So thank you.
Yep. Great to see you, Senator.
Thank you. All right, Dave.
Yeah, thanks again, Mark, for for all that information. Appreciate that update. I wonder if it's, and coming from a journalism background, we tend to oversimplify things. I'm wondering, at the risk of doing that, and not a detrimental way, is it helpful to think about these data systems as the qualitative data, which comes from people who are usually flawed and inputting data based on whatever biases that they might have as individuals, human beings, versus quantitative data, which is devoid of any sort of subjectivity. So systems that are using quantitative data to determine outcomes are not necessarily without risk, but less risk is involved in those sort of systems versus ones that are involving qualitative data. So I think an example is in the judicial system, where forensic evidence has been problematic for since the 2009 National Academy of Sciences came out saying forensic evidence is essentially junk science, but law enforcement agencies continue to use forensic evidence in prosecution. And as we deploy machine learning and AI in law enforcement, how are they reinforcing those problems in forensic science versus using new techniques that are actually rooted in science to make some decisions? So I know that might be outside the scope of what we're doing, but I'm curious to know in that specific realm, what can we do, if anything, to encourage better data generation that would ensure better outcomes? And again, that's maybe outside the scope of what we're doing, but I just want to throw that idea out there. But the question I have for you is just in terms of the policies and procedures that you were talking about. Do we know when we're going to have that publicly available? Is there a timeline on that? And who will be doing those audits, and what will that process be like?
Yeah, the policy is required by the end of the year, or it might be by the end of January. But we will meet the deadline for the delivery of the draft policy. So that's the timeline we're looking at. We can get it done earlier. We absolutely will. I would say, given where we're tracking at close to the end of October, it's unlikely that we get something out the door much in advance of that. To go back to your earlier comment, I think it ties quite nicely with what Nick D'Onofrio was saying about the underlying data and the importance of understanding that, the use of some of these technologies in law enforcement, it can be as simple as, we have to redact certain kinds of things, whether someone, identifies a weapon in a video, that data is less subject to interpretation than perhaps, in identifying particular people in a video, or trying to pull data out of something that was narratively described in a situation. So those are great considerations for what kind of damage and assistance can happen in a public safety manner. So I and as much as the law enforcement community is drowning under a sort of weight of sort of video evidence, and trying to find ways to handle that, I think that some of these technologies, again, if worked on in very precise ways, can help speed up and make these things more available to both the public, to journalism, and to the judicial system at large.
Can I add something, Mark, to I appreciate the question. I'm going to give you my opinion, although I have some standing as the chief data officer on it. I wouldn't make the distinction necessarily that you're making between like quantitative and qualitative, or objective versus subjective data. I think what you're hearing in some of the other presentations, and I think probably what's a good way for us to think about it in terms of policy development, is what are the stakes for the use of that data, or what are the consequences for it? So like the stakes are very high in law enforcement, but if it's something where someone's using it to summarize some papers or do meeting notes, as one of the examples that came up earlier, the stakes are very low, or the consequences are very low for that. So all data to some extent has some limitations or flaws with it. There's a lot of subjectivity and everything, and both qualitative and quantitative data have merits in different settings. So I think we want to think about how it's being used in terms of what the state's doing, whether it's providing services or making some determination about something. And again, law enforcement has like particularly high stakes, but to me, that's really the way to think about it, not so much based on the quality or some of the questions about whether it's qualitative or quantitative. Is my 2 cents.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Nick.
Hi, I'm Nick with the Freedom of Information Commission, asking on behalf of Colleen Murphy, who had to sign off. But the question, kind of a three-part question regarding guidelines, and I'm not sure if this was what you were referring to for the policy, but do we have a timeline of when the guidelines will be available? And also, are the AI audits part of those guidelines, and who will conduct those audits? Thanks.
Yeah, I think the similar question earlier, the guidelines and policies are due, I believe it's the end of January.
February 1.
February 1, thank you.
Who's counting?
That day might make a difference. The who will be auditing that will be at least identified suggestions for that will be part of the policy. So that has not yet been determined. And gosh, what was the third part of that?
Oh, it was more just it kind of got linked into your answer, I guess. So was the our AI audits part of the guidelines, and so
Yes, they're required to be. So yes, yep.
Thank you.
Just to nitpick a little too, that what's in the requirements is an assessment, not an audit, if that's a distinction that's meaningful to you, but that's what we're just for ongoing assessments of the use of AI.
Thanks, Scott. And Matt?
Thanks, Mark and Scott. Great presentation, and thank you for your service. I had a question. At the federal level, there's been some encouragement by Congress or others to have the NIST AI RMF framework be part of the procurement process for high-risk use. Have you taken a look at the NIST AI framework? Has that influenced any of the guidelines or policies that you're thinking about?
We absolutely have in both the NIST work and the White House work, trying to make sure that we in Connecticut are not sort of running out ahead of what's doable. We sort of recognize our place in our ability to influence if we go that deeply for something that's like this in a different direction, that it's really dangerous for in lots of different ways. That we understand that industry doesn't want 50 different states doing their own things. We look at our desire to harmonize not just with sort of national regulations, but in some ways global, and are working with how can industry help to do align with policies that are ethical, that describe how it's used. One of the elements that we talk about quite deeply is, if you're building AI into your solution, provide us the ability to shut it off without having to completely stop using your entire solution. That way, if bias is detected, we don't have to stop with an overall solution. We can just stop with the AI part and still continue on with those other areas that create business value for us. And so that risk management framework and the thinking behind that NIST puts is something that we're closely watching and very familiar with. Highly advocate that for others too.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Matt. So we will be following up. Thank you so much. They are Mark and Scott are both part of our working group, so they will be here at the meetings going forward. We will provide that slide deck. I think some of the interesting things. I do have several things that I'm going to want to follow up with you on. I think one, when we initially envisioned the policies and procedures, it was mainly governing around the automated decision making and more high risk uses. But I didn't know if you are also going to put forth some policies and procedures regarding the use of generative AI. And then another interest was in the, mentioning and Scott in one of the bullet points on that right to be forgotten, which is interesting. Again, the interplay of our state's data privacy law, which again don't apply to government, but for private industry, that one of those 5 rights we created was a right to deletion. And how does that interplay with the fact that the data can't be unseen once it's entered into some of these generative AI models? How does that right to deletion play in there? So, anyways, thank you very much. You did mention some use cases. And now we're going to transition to Deloitte, who is going to present on some government use cases and way to use AI within the state government. We have Gabe Grab and Jamia McDonald. Gabe actually presented at Connecticut's Digital Government Summit, so some of you may have seen him already. With that, I will turn it over.
All right, Senator, thank you. Can you hear me and see me okay?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. Actually, Gabe is not able to join us. He's my partner in crime, so I'm going to do my best to represent him. My name is Jamia McDonald. I am a partner with Deloitte Consulting. By way of how I work in the firm, I am part of our government and public service practice. Within that, I lead AI for all of our state, local, higher ed clients. So Gabe is a partner of mine. Just by way of background to give you context, before coming to Deloitte, I spent 20 years in state government with a very unique path. I was Deputy Chief of Staff for 3 governors. I was the Homeland Security Emergency Management Director, and I was a Child Welfare Director. So I have covered just about all aspects of government, and it's very near and dear to my heart. For the next few minutes, I want to talk to you about use cases, and if you'll bear with me, I want to do a little context setting. You guys have been at this for a few hours, and I appreciate it. So I'm going to try and tie some themes together, but happy to follow wherever you need me to go. I want to start with a very simple thing that we talk to our clients about, and I think my role here today is to talk about industry and how we're thinking about it and approaching it, so feel free to ask questions as I go. But I spend a lot of my time in governors' offices with executive clients, NASCIO, helping get everyone ready for what is Gen AI, right? That is the newest. But what I like to do is kind of ground everyone in what AI is from a spectrum, and you've talked about it, but bear with me on the context. So Gen AI is the newest flavor, but we all know AI has been around for 40, 50 years and has really hit government in the last half decade or so. We look at it as 2 axes: the human touch, moving on the left from high touch to minimum touch, and task complexity from simple to multivariate. And the AI movement really began, and you've heard about robotic process automation and the high touch simple tasks being replicated into intelligent automation, which not only repeats, but it can automate across, right? This is where you see natural language processing, text analytics, OCR, predictive analytics, descriptive analytics. The next generation was cognitive analytics. And inside cognitive analytics is where you see natural language understanding and sentiment analysis and computer vision, machine learning enabled analytics. And then you get into narrow AI. And as you watch, the spectrum moves up to highly complex task completion and minimum human touch. And I heard so many people testify today about human touch, and our phrase is human in the loop. There are a few things that we don't ask human to be in the loop for because of all of the things you talked about, learning and training models. But the narrow AI is really where we're at right now. And generative AI is right at that outside ring. And so, you know, when the robots take over the world is what we call general AI, and we are hundreds of, ever away from that. AI is a probabilistic set of measures that are informed. They don't know right from wrong. It's learning, right? So we are moving up the scale of learning and intuition and probabilistic measures. I show this for a couple of reasons. One is to help explain kind of the maturity up to the emerging, but also when we as business come in, we don't come in with a single solution set. And when we look at the use cases, you'll see that. To me, as a former business client, but also serving my clients, we like to understand the business problem, and then we bring the correct type of technology and solution. So as I've listened to all of the things you're considering, know that that's how we will build solutions and work with clients, is what is the problem and how do we put these solution sets together. So it's really a layering structure. Two more quick slides, and then I'll do use cases to kind of prove this point. I want to spend just a minute on Gen AI, and I've heard discussions about this already, but I look at this kind of iceberg to help us understand a very simple visual. And you've spent a lot of time on a few of these. So at the bottom of this is the computing power. Gen AI is happening now because the computing power is now accessible to the market, right? The amount of power and energy required for these large LLM models requires this to be much stronger, but AI infrastructure is AI infrastructure. Depending on the different solution set, you still need that. You talked about cloud and data platforms, right? The security layer, also the same regarding the solution. When you get into modeling, LLMs, different types of models will support different types of AI solutions. But in generative AI models, you discussed about the privacy and other things. Know that as an industry right now, and I think Mark testified to this, we are not encouraging public use interaction for states that are just venturing into it. We're looking at internal models for the governance and the technology and the governments to feel comfortable with how they manage it, but also closed loop. We don't recommend at this point, for all of the privacy reasons and HIPAA issues that you will face, that you bring in these large language models without knowing the transparency of the data, without knowing how it's seeded and where it's stored. And so this is where modeling for Gen AI will matter. And then you see what's above the iceberg. And again, I think about this very simply like the iPhone. It's going to have several applications built on a framework, and you will see a lot of Gen AI solutions coming. It will be what is the right solution for the business problem set. So we use this visual to kind of help show the layers. From the models down, very similar for all AI, but when you get into the generative, the application that sits on top is going to be specific to the use case or need. And the last conversation before the use cases around generative AI that we spend a lot of time with our clients talking about is not only what is it and what are the modalities, but why now? And again, it's been around for a while, but with the hardware, with the democratization of these models being out there, as you talk about it, your clients, our clients, the public, are going to be using it. So it's a matter of time of government needing to respond to kind of constituent needs. And so it's coming from all sides, but the last three bullets are the ones that I want to emphasize. We look at it to be a force multiplier. I think one of the senators earlier talked about what's the impact. We haven't seen AI fully replace humans. It's changed tasks. It's accelerated usability. It's raised their jobs from, paperwork to social work and helped them do the higher value tasks, reducing the burden. So many of our clients are, as we go through the PHE unwind or any of these other large public movements, you're seeing the burden really come down on them. And then technologies, how to guide decisions and focus on critical tasks. Again, we're very much of the belief that this is an accelerator and an amplifier and should not be used as a replacement, but jobs will shift. Okay, so use cases. In AI and government, these are kind of the 5 buckets that we have seen the use cases gravitate to. We see it in document generation. So when you think about policy reviews or public hearings or creating reports, when and where document generation occurs is where a lot of governments are moving quickly. Case management, again, I think there was a mention of co-pilots, how to assist with harvesting data across many systems. So how does that support? Knowledge management. One thing that we are encouraging states to consider is to bring your workforce along with you. I think the CTO testified to the same. While we are all grappling with the governance and responsible use, this is such an opportunity to also have the workforce get comfortable with what it is and how to use it responsibly while those systems are being designed. Customer engagement, how do you make the user experience easier and more engaging, more personalized? And then obviously back office functions where technologies are available now to write code and to do quality checks and to validate in a much more efficient real-time way. So looking at use cases, I want to change the lens as we've been talking about it to how we approach with our clients, and we look at it through user personas, and as I mentioned, what the use cases are. So I want to give you 5 user personas and what we might experience, and then talk about the solutions and design. So for health and human services, you might have Julia, a resident who is dealing with being stuck and overwhelmed because she lost her job, has a 15-year-old granddaughter and a 12-year-old grandson she cares for, and she's heard of food stamps, but she has no idea where to start. So that would be a consumer that we would support. From a workforce development standpoint, doing the work, Robert, a workforce supervisor, is overwhelmed and feels like his work never gets done. He's unorganized with the endless applications and tasks and cases, because in our effort to make things efficient, we usually end up creating more signals for him. Then there's Janelle, a student. So in our higher education system, first person in her family to attend college, manages her FAFSA independently, has struggled to get grants and loan applications through, is frustrated by the multi-offices that she needs to go through, financial assistance and scholarship, and then constantly stressed about debt burden. We also have Anthony, who does IT operations. Anthony is a data whiz and has been writing reports and queries as agencies' needs have come up. He's concerned when he gets promoted, he won't be able to understand the data, or the clients that he serves won't be able to. Data quality and data management continue to be ongoing challenges. He's interested in AI, but not really sure where to start, so he's curious. And then Emily, who's an audit supervisor working in the tax and revenue space, is a tax analyst who's worked her way up to supervisor. The revenues are down, and she's concerned her team is missing right cases to audit. Agency has access to large quantity of data and has heard about AI, but unsure how to do it, and hasn't heard from IT on what she's supposed to do, so is very experimental. So as we walk through these use cases, these are how our teams engage with clients to think about what they need. And wanted to flip the script for you on, so how does AI help? What are some use cases where we engage, but also what are the considerations that might be relevant to this use case in this solution set? So, obviously AI can help her learn that she is eligible not only for SNAP, but she could apply for or automatically enrolled in Medicaid, TANF, LIHEAP, the housing funds. She can simply fill out applications to apply for all of the benefits with less touch. She's received tailored messages letting her know through whatever modality Julia chooses, her benefits can be approved and received within a matter of days, and she can be notified about employment and training services. AI has the ability to do all of those things for her now. And the use cases that exist that are in the sphere right now where states are using these include resource engines that can automatically harvest her data and curate a set of resources and discovery services that could be available to her. AI-assisted omni-channel. So as I mentioned, the onset of text, email, online notices, and alerts can overwhelm us. There's now technology that integrates that based on your choice. My mom still very much prefers in-person phone calls. My son only talks to me via text. So it can be tailored to the consumer. A translation engine. There are engines now that not only have the ability to translate real time, but the depth of the language capability is beyond, is it Spanish to, regional Spanish and regional dialects based on populations. Navigator assistant that enables the clients with question and answer to guide them. And instead of the normal workflows that we see of if then, it can skip components automatically. A customer experience engine that develops checklists based on that customer's needs, and then policy engine that can support knowing casework and analysts how to guide her. In the top right are considerations for AI success, and I've heard them sprinkled across the hearing, but to assess and establish standards for safeguarding PII. This would be a use case where PII is implicated. And so knowing what the governance and standards will be as we build these use cases. Prompt engineering is what we call, how do you ask questions to AI and Gen AI? We went from Siri, what time it is, to now generative AI, and the more complex AIs can answer compound statements with lots of data. And so helping our consumers and staff get more sophisticated and interacting with it is a right now opportunity. But also, as you talked about bias, prompt engineering training will allow us to start flagging when unconscious bias occurs in the asking of the question, because it can occur there too. You'd want to establish guardrails to connect residents with the appropriate resources and services, whether that's geographic, whether that's biographic, like whatever those are, but this would require guardrails in the model. And then the alignment of eligibility rules and criteria. So as you build a model and you want to integrate the use of systems, the rules and eligibility criteria that cross those systems would also be implicated. I'm going to pause there because I know that's big and I've got a few more, but Senator, does this approach make sense? And I can cover a couple more, or I can just talk use cases too.
Yeah, no, I think this is helpful, right, in seeing what is possible. And I think that as we look at the legislation, we're looking at it in a few ways. One is regulation, two is promoting businesses and building skills, which we'll talk about later, but three is using it in government, right? And what are uses that can help make it easier for our constituents to interact and access services. And I think that that it's important for us to see these. I'm not sure if anyone else has questions now, or do you want to go into some specific use cases?
I will keep going unless you stop me. How's that?
That sounds good.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to move us forward. So each of the topics are aligned the same way, and I'll let you read kind of the content, but I'm going to focus in on the use cases at the bottom. So we talked about use cases in health and human services that range from interpretation to workflow guidance to filling out data or interaction. In the higher education space, there's 3 use cases that are moving pretty quickly. And we talked about Janelle as a consumer. Scholarship matchmaking, so helping students find and identify scholarship opportunities for their profiles, for their interests, and even automate some of the data collection and population so that you can make it easier to access school loans or grants. Tuition payment simulation. We've seen universities simulate tuition payment options to help students know how to both fund their education and what the tail looks like. I also went to law school and enjoyed the intellectual mortgage that followed. And knowing, early on as we deal with student debt nationally, we've seen a lot of universities consider this type of simulation to help students be more situated. And then the student job connector. So this connector could be used in different environments, but as we are seeing universities leverage AI, similar to the scholarship matchmaker, identifying on-campus, off-campus opportunities, and also in an economy where it is less likely you're going to be in a job for 30 years, these kind of skill-based gig economy, this type of connector allows students to have multiple experiences in a much more personalized way. Inside of transportation, again, thinking about Anthony and his IT operations, we have Discover AI, which is a technology that generates SQL queries and syntax. Again, can be used in multiple settings, but inside transportation specifically, we're seeing a lot of these types of solutions come. Report generation and cataloging of assets are incredibly powerful inside of transportation and infrastructure. We have several clients that are looking at how they catalog and do more predictive modeling on infrastructure investments. On the contact center agent, again, multi-use, particularly in transportation where they have call centers, it can route different opportunities. So if you think about bus passes or other types of mediums, contact center agent as an avatar is being tested by some government agencies. And then data summarizer for large data sets and nudge engine is being used on, think Waze or other types of navigation tools. It's also being used in state transportation on helping people find different either routes, or we have one state that's partnering with their Parks and Rec agency to drive to different economic opportunities in the state to have visitors. And then last kind of avenue in government around tax and revenue services, obviously audit and monetary use cases are happening. Intelligent case management, so parsing tax case files to understand actionable, and I don't want to replace any auditors out there, but the ability for them to comb large amounts of data, find discrepancies, and rapidly identify it for follow-up. We have one state that inside of turning on that intelligent case management and audit function, I think something silly like in the first 4 hours, 100 cases were flagged. Not inherently wrong, but it was able to focus their time on the higher value, higher risk opportunities, and the same with audit engagement. It helps taxpayers who've been selected for audit, so guiding them through the audit process to reduce time on preparation and document gathering while getting their materials ready and ramped up. And then in the back office, we've seen revenue and tax services, both in their, HR and procurement and logistics side, but as they're starting to think about how they catalog and create audit support around compliance. So again, happy to answer questions or talk about any other use cases that you might have questions about, but really just wanted to spend a minute on how we, from the business perspective, are thinking with our clients on what is the problem set that you're encountering so that we're solutioning correctly. And I see I've got questions, so I'll pause.
Great. Thank you. All right.
Yeah, of course.
Nick?
Yeah, brilliant work, number one. So thank you and the team. Could you comment about where, without giving away proprietary information, have you deployed any of this anywhere? And
Yeah.
could you help us with that, please?
Yes, and I cannot list clients publicly, but I am happy to have them connect with you. Most of our clients are very eager to share what they've done for two reasons. One, they've found rapid success they didn't expect, and most importantly, where they failed fast, have some lessons learned. So I'm happy to work with the senator offline to put you in touch. And if there's any specific one, Senator, that you're interested in, I can hone in on those as well.
Great. I will definitely follow it up with you on that. And I think, I mean, when you see the ability, right, as Mark and Scott had mentioned, one of the things for making, I guess, statutes easier for people to understand, but I definitely see making services easier to access. And there's so many times where we have questions, whether it's what are your small business opportunities or what are your housing opportunities.
Yeah.
And a lot of the programs are housed, and we have many silos in government, right? And there are different programs that are housed in different agencies. And so the
That's
ability for people to identify those and have different opportunities flagged for them. And I think the other thing is the ability to communicate and reach people in their idiom, right? Whether they're more comfortable by text, by email, by phone, but also in their language, that real-time language translation eventually, that breaking down those communications barriers is one of those benefits that we are seeing. It's not that we will see, but it's just improving our ability to communicate. So thank you.
Well, and to that point, Senator, I'd be loath to think of an example. Nobody called me when everything was going well, right? They called when they were in crisis and something was wrong, and that's usually the hardest time to navigate. So you're right. These tools can take and lower some of that stress and fear if done well.
And between your presentation and then Nick earlier from Nick Stowe from Washington, who had worked at there their version of the Department of Labor during the pandemic. I just finished reading Recoding America, so all of these are bringing up case.
Yeah, well, as hard as that was,
that
that gave us opportunity to jump through, solve problems creatively and get right to the human element of it. So,
right, yeah, I think that's what you hit, the human element, and breaking down these layers of policy to make sure we're focused on helping our citizens and designing new products with the citizen in mind, user-centered design. So with that, Fahid.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Jamie, for this wonderful presentation. This was both inspiring and clarifying. A couple of slides back, you mentioned a feature named the nudge engine. I suspect the name comes from nudge theory in behavioral economics.
That's right.
Where the main thesis is minor changes in the environment can affect the behavior of individuals. And this suddenly attracted my attention. I come from a safety and security background, and nudges used in the form of dark patterns on the web, or nudges used in the form of information calibration and fine-tuning are essentially seen as malicious applications of social engineering.
Yeah,
I'm curious how Deloitte has performed impact assessment and safety assessment on the nudge engine feature specifically.
thank you for that question. It is absolutely driven by behavioral science. We use positive nudges. Our firm actually chooses not to do negative of you're behind or you're late or you forgot. And the way we work with our clients, actually, the nudge engine is quite popular in our casework of, hey, caseworker, today you helped feed 38 people, right? We like to engineer socially to reinforce the good behavior, number one. And then two, we actually spend a lot of time on what the narrative is in the nudge script to ensure that it does have that human impact that's positive. And we have statistics on where we've implemented it. Again, I'm trying not to say the state's names, but happy to put you in touch with them, where we absolutely measure the impact. And we do A/B testing on which language saw better impact. So we're very conscious of what can create unconscious behavioral reactions and drive towards positive outcomes that are lifting people up and encouraging that. I hope that answers your question.
It doesn't. I'm sorry, Jamie.
Okay.
Who defines positive and negative here? Do your clients have a say in it? And if they do, how's the impact of their choices measured?
The clients define it. We come with options. We give frameworks for them to decide. And it's not a large scale of things. It's usually defined to certain actions in a workflow. So it's not a natural language learning model that is unmonitored. It's usually pretty focused. So yeah, 100% with the clients, engineered with them, and can give you some of those use cases to help see where and how it's used, and they monitor with us. So usually when a client implements a nudge engine, we start very small with 1 or 2 before we go beyond that to ensure that it's having the positive impact.
Well, I have follow-up questions, but in the interest of time, I'll leave them for an
I'm
offline
happy to spend time
conversation.
with you and share any information you want, truly.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah.
Thank you. And you mentioned the positive nudge engines. Just there was interesting research. One of my interests is in higher education, workforce development. But the positive the implications of positive nudges, a lot of times first generation students, college students end up dropping out because they're struggling with things that they think it's just because of them, that meaning that they don't have parents or other people to talk to who can say, no, that's normal. That's something that all students are going through. And they've shown how positive nudges can help with, educational attainment as you go through that. But with that, Nick?
Yes, hi, thanks. So I just had, in kind of reviewing these general AI use cases, for instance, document generation, case management, and back office functions. From your perspective, can you speak as to how these AI use cases might help the state agencies and all different facets of government in terms of processing and reviewing records requests? We've seen a huge increase in terms of the data, the size of the records requests, and the in terms of, what people are looking for is also in terms of just the sheer size of, in terms of storage size of those documents. So how can these AI use cases help in that process? Thank you.
So let me answer that with an example. I joined a state executive committee last month, and they brought their attorney, and I suspected I would spend a lot of time answering questions on the legality of some of these. And the lawyer was most excited on how I helped him do his FOIA requests and how I helped him write, get some general research. So to your question on document generation, and I want to underscore everything that everyone's testified before, it's about the data that goes in. It's about how it's monitored. It's about how it's used and stored. So I'm going to skip restating that because that's fundamental to any. In document generation specifically, I'm trying to think if there's a specific agency or use case that comes to mind for you, but we built a model for procurement for the federal government that ingested the entire FAR. We call it the FAR bot. So when you think about a complex set of navigable documents, I would put Medicaid or procurement in the top of the list. But they've ingested their entire policy manual in a way that, one, they found discrepancies, right? When you have hundreds of pages of documentation, you're also able to find misalignment on policy that may create confusion, but also to simplify and accelerate answers and customer service if used in that manner. So it's kind of a big question, Nick. I hope that answers it. If you have something more specific, but under all of these models, I keep, I'll restate, it's about the data being ingested. It's about the use of it and where you want to keep it. That's, kind of fundamental, but it can accelerate time and, intellect.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. And will you be able to share your slide deck?
Absolutely.
Information so we can share that out with the members of the task force. And Jamie, thank you so much for your presentation. And I will be back in touch, and I would love to get in touch with, see if you could put me in touch with some of your clients.
Absolutely. And I'll drop my email in the chat. So if anybody has follow-up questions, happy to help.
Great. Thank you so much. So with that, we have one last issue for today. We had mentioned earlier that, with the legislation, we are looking really at three parts: regulation, what we can do to promote business, and then state use, right? And potential use cases of AI, beneficial uses. Within the promoting AI for business, and also overlap with the state use, would be building the skills within our residents and within the workers. And the IBM CEO has, and Accenture, others have cited this statistic that AI is going to make us 30% more efficient. But how? Right? We need to identify what are the skills, and we need to teach people how to use it so that they can get the full benefit from the different shortcuts. And so what we want to do is try to identify different skills that we need to teach. Where are they being taught within K-12, within the community colleges? But more important, not more importantly, what are the skills that the companies are looking for? And so in order to appropriately do that, we've reached out to CASE to see if they'd be willing to do a study for us. So with that, I'm going to ask, is Terry on, Nick, or?
She's here. Yeah, Terry, why don't you take it from here for us?
Terry, yeah, if you want to take it from here.
Hi, everyone, and I'll be very quick about this. I put together a PowerPoint on what the goals and deliverables for this overview of what's going on in Connecticut related to artificial intelligence skills. And what I would ask that you do, and MJ, if you could do this, and if not, just let me know, but send it to the working group members and ask them to review. It's a very simple, it's 9 slides, what we're suggesting for questions, for interviews, and for survey. And if you could just respond back to me, my email and contact information is on the last slide. And let me know any suggestions you have. They're welcome. We will be getting underway with this soon because the timing is quick. We expect to brief the working group on what we found, like a 10-15-minute presentation on January 10th, if Senator Maroney and Nick ask us to do that. And we'll also submit a report on our findings on January 15th. So if you have comments, if you could look at it relatively quickly, your time on that would be much appreciated, and any comments are welcome.
Great. Thank you very much, Terry.
You're welcome.
We'll ask people we'll get that out to everyone by the end of the day today and ask you to please get any feedback you have back to us by Friday.
That's great.
And again, we're hopes of getting the report so it's actionable for us for the next legislative session, and having Terry and the members from CASE present this report to us at our January 10th meeting. And then just to go over, our next meeting is November 15th. And then, so we're going a week earlier because we didn't want to go the day before Thanksgiving in November. And then in December, will also be an earlier meeting. December is the 13th. And I'm not going to say, well, I didn't want to meet on the 20th because that's my birthday and I'm turning 50 and I'm going to be crying in my beer all day. So I didn't think you wanted to see a weepy-eyed old man on the task force that day. So, but December 13th will be a hybrid meeting. We are planning on offering a longer meeting that day, perhaps a 4-hour meeting, and we'll outline that we are going to be in person, and that's the meeting that we're going to be focused on both the skills building, but also on what we can do to promote AI businesses in Connecticut. So we do have a number of people who are using AI for healthcare who will be speaking to us that day. Nick, do you want to talk about, Nick was able to arrange someone to open that meeting for us.
Yeah, we're working on this. We're trying to get a leader, a major leader from one of the industries who we know wants to do this. We just have to, work the arrangements to do that with them, so that you can get an industry perspective of what other people are thinking and how they're committing to this. I think most people are kind of aligning to where the senator is going, which is this is we got a lot of things to worry about, but this is a good opportunity for productivity improvement, for user interface improvement. There's a lot of good things that will come of this. We just have to be totally mindful of all the bad things that are possible along with this, and we have to be consequential, with our recommendations. And that's always the issue with technology, is for us to be mindful of the fact that the right ideas are clearly what got us here, but that doesn't stop people who want to do bad things from doing bad things with good ideas. So we just need to constantly continue to remind ourselves of that as we go along here. And we're excited to actually kind of get this, to a culmination as we get towards the end of the year. And the senator's done a great job of getting us here so far. So thank you for that, Senator.
Thanks, Nick. And we'll also have people from academia addressing us that. So with that, I think thank you everyone for attending. I know we did run a little bit long today, so we are trying to get a lot of information in these meetings. I think they will be 3 hours. I think the next one as well, and then we'll have a longer time for the in-person meeting, but at least when we're in person, we'll build in some bio breaks into the meeting. So thank you everyone for attending. We will get that information out to you. Please get back to us your feedback on the survey for CASE by Friday. So thank you and have a great day.